Thank you for listening to Scattershot, a wild Western action adventure. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button right now to saddle up for even more thrill-packed roundups. Chapter 1. The little cowboy pulled up when he saw Rip Campbell riding toward the gates of the Double N. He was frowning. "Hello, Rip." "Howdy, Stubby." Rip pulled up. He looked at the little man. "There was shooting last night down Horn. It was Sam Long. Somebody plugged him in the dark. We was chasing some yearlings. Somebody was driving off." Stubby sighed, still avoiding Rip's eyes. "Makes me foreman, top hand, and employee of the Double N all rolled into one." He was silent. Rip's eyes narrowed. At last, he drew a long breath. Stubby looked up. "And they got away too, yay." "That must have been down where the creek crosses my land," Rip said slowly. "By my creek somewhere. Hear any echoes?" "Yes," Stubby studied his saddle. "Yes, it was on your land, Rip. The yearlings went that way." He fumbled with his bridle. "Going up to see Miss Bodine, Joan. Old man's gone to town." Rip considered. Then he gave a quick nod. "I think so," he said. "I heard the shooting and rode out right afterward, but I didn't find anything. I'll take a look in on Sam." Stubby, accepting this as a welcome end to the conversation, turned his mount and rode west by south toward the sloping valley where the Double N herd was grazing. Even without the troubled frown that he wore as he trotted off, Rip's face might never have been handsome. It was too deeply bronzed and stern. His jaw was clean, and his mouth and eyebrows were straight lines. His gray eyes seemed always to be looking directly ahead. Tall and powerful, he sat his saddle, wide bat-wing chaps flapping as he rode, swinging easily with his mount. But that was the only ease in his manner. Stubby's news had struck hard. Riding up the sandy pathway, he saw Joan Walters on the veranda of the ranch house. He circled the bunkhouse and drew up before the steps below her. The mysterious gun-crazy Rustler of Valle del Herbaje had struck once again, this time to lose Rip, his best friend and his sweetheart, and to wipe out, to a man, top hand, foreman, and crew of the Double N. He smiled, hopefully. When Rip smiled, it was usually a revelation. His face seemed always so set and stern that there was a keen, delightful surprise in watching the flash of white, even teeth against the hard tan of his face. But there was no answering smile for him this morning. As though she had divined that he might come up, and was anxious to avoid even a semblance of welcome, Joan Walters got out of her chair, uncrossing slim booted legs and striding down the steps with the grace of a boy. She halted at the head of Rip's mount. For a moment, she studied him. He could sense instinctively the change in her manner. "How's Sam?" he asked defensively. "Stubby just told me." "He'll live," replied the girl briefly. She looked at him defiantly for a moment. Then she looked away. Dark, curling lashes swept the suntanned bloom of her cheeks. Rip saw her red lips tremble for an instant. Her eyes, troubled, dwelt on the way the sunlight toyed with the gold glints of her tawny hair. Suddenly, she caught her breath, her blue eyes widened, and she swung back to him impulsively. "Oh, I suppose I shouldn't feel this way, Rip. But there've been so many things lately. Why can't you do something, at least speak?" "But Joan, I don't care what they say." "You're saying plenty," she averred. "Uncle's gone to town, or you wouldn't be standing here. Can't you? Where were you last night, anyway? Do you realize they stopped in at your house after that shot hit Sam Long, and found you weren't there?" Rip's face suddenly froze. "So thoughtos it," he breathed tensely. "I knew they were talking, but I didn't think you'd listen." "Good Lord, Joan, don't they realize that my stock's been run off too?" "Not a lot of it," she replied, and then bit her lip. There was a certain, unwilling contrition in her manner. Joan Walters was a self-reliant type, cool and steady. She had spent most of her life in the Southwest. Yet beside Rip, she was tiny and seemed completely feminine and helpless. A sense of the bigness and the cool, vibrant strength of him could not escape her as they stood there. "I know," she murmured after a pause. "I should be the last even to listen. Maybe Ito's just that I'm angry that they talk so, and a little angry with you because you never speak, never seem to care what men say." "But I don't care," he interrupted with a laugh. "What's worse, when I stop to figure it out, I can almost convince myself that I am the mysterious Rustler of Valle del Herbaje." She realized that he had said nothing of where he had been in the dead of the night before, when her uncle and Stubby, after the foreman had been hit, rode to Rip's ranch house and found it deserted. The three men had ridden out when their Chinese cook, running up from the bunkhouse, had sworn in chattering accents that cattle were moving under the stars. They had come up with the raiders in the dark, at the place where the creek crossed the Square D, Rip's property, and had been met with a fusillade. "Uncle swears that he'll make you prove an alibi," Joan said softly. Or admit." "Why, naturally, I heard the shooting. Jim Guerin and I rode out different ways. I started for the stock, and he went towards the creek." He hesitated, aware that they were not alone, and wary. They had been so absorbed that neither had noticed the rider, who, lowering the bars at the fence below, came riding up the trail. It was Joan's look which warned Rip. He saw her eyes, startled at first, fixed beyond him. Then they were instantly wide and resentful, and a slow flush stained her cheeks. He whirled. The newcomer looked distinctly out of place in the range country. Almost as tall as Rip, he was slim as a girl. That he was not a native Westerner was apparent in a glance. He wore neat whipcord breeches, pegged, and his slim legs and trim feet were encased in polished soft riding boots. Under a stiff-brimmed Stetson, his face was dark and boldly handsome, keen, cynical black eyes, a small black mustache, and a laughing, bitter mouth. Though the eyes were laughing, they were frankly ardent too. Worshipping. Joan's flush deepened as the man sat looking at her. His smile was enraging. Suddenly, he swept off his hat with a gesture. "Good morning," he said in a low, cultured voice. "I'm afraid I don't know all the etiquette of the occasion. How do I go about applying for a job as a hand?" The girl's head came up resentfully under the boldness of his eyes. "Not that way," she retorted quickly. "For the first thing, you get off your horse and look as though Ito's really work you want." The mocking, delicate eyebrows rose, but the smile did not disappear. Rip found his fists clenched. Chapter 2. The stranger swung off his mount with little ease. He gave a brief bow. In another man in that setting, the bow would have been ludicrous. Rip suddenly found it pitiable. Yet the stranger was not one easily to excite pity, at least not intentionally. "My name is Gruman, Joseph Gruman," he announced coolly. "I understood you were short-handed here, and—" "Where'd you hear that?" Rip interrupted. Groomman gave him a mocking smile. "In Bochera, yesterday. I saw Miss Walters in the street, and immediately tried to find out if the double N might not be short-handed. I understood it might be." "Ito's not," Joan Walters said briefly. "And when it is, we use cowpunchers. This is a ranch, Mr. Groomman, not a fashionable horse show." Rip straightened, aware suddenly of how deeply the girl resented this man's arrogant admiration. At her words, stinging and hard, Gruman's smile left him for an instant. The mocking lips took on new bitterness. He gave his jerky little bow and turned back to his horse. "That is unfortunate," he said, low-voiced. "It would not interest mademoiselle to know that I should have to work before I could buy more suitable clothes. Good morning." He rode off. They watched his straight back as he sat his saddle. His spine was like a ramrod. Cavalry, Rip grunted to himself. For a moment, Joan's eyes were clouded. Her swift transitions from annoyance and anger to sudden contrition had always puzzled and charmed Rip. But now she turned upon him in quick fury. He was insulting, she exclaimed. An arrogant little prig. I expected you might say something, Rip. He stared. But there was nothing to say. He came to you for a job. For the rest, I was more sorry for the poor devil than anything else. That chap's seen better days. Of course he has. A remittance man, probably. He isn't the first to reach this country. Thrown out for misbehavior, at home somewhere, and thinking girls in the West are simply savages who ought to be glad of his casual interest. Her cheeks burned. Rip had not considered it seriously before, but he began to understand how the man's bold admiration had infuriated her. He knew Gruman's type well enough himself, yet, strangely, it had been impossible to visualize anyone who could look at Joan with anything but worship. He commenced to stammer out his vague thoughts when he was interrupted again by the clatter of hoofs. This time it was roaring Walters, owner of Double N, who pounded fiercely through the open gate at sight of Rip, red-faced and bleak-eyed. Swinging from the saddle, he halted belligerently before the visitor, a small, wizened little man with a swaggering, bullying manner. "What you doin' on this ranch, Rip?" he shot out. Rip frowned. "I heard about Sam." "Heard about M?" Walters interrupted. "Yes, reckon you must have heard about him, long ago. Maybe you heard about Harry Holto's comet horses, too. Rip, you ain't wanted around the Double N by night or day, and until you've got you where you belong, I'll trouble you to keep away." Rip had been calm for a long time. His instinct had been to call Groomman to a halt, but he had refrained. He had a bad reputation with the two guns that hung at his hips, and somehow, to force a fight with the young foreigner, under the circumstances, might have seemed like bullying. Then there was Joan's anger, and now old Walters, who had long disliked him. Rip felt that he had stood almost enough. "I'll go, Walters, if you feel that way," he said softly. "But I reckon you've been in this country long enough to know Ito's not safe to toss around insinuations like that." Walters snarled. His hands rested on his thin hips, from one of which an aged six-shooter dangled. "I been in this country long enough to know you better get out of it," he cried. "Thoughto's what some of the boys in town are thinking, too. You better get those comet horses out of sight across the border pronto, too, 'cause there's a posse out looking for them right now. And for you, too." Rip scarcely heard the information. His gray eyes were slits of blank steel. He drew a quick breath. "You're only safe for so long, Walters," he said tensely. "Even here. I've taken enough. The next word you got to say about horse-thieving, say it with your hand reaching for your gun." Walters met those deadly blank eyes and calmed. He gave a sneer, hesitated a moment, and then stumped up the steps. "Reckon I ain't hankerin' to follow Sam long," he said. "Just get going, Rip. I reckon there's some'll take care of you right pronto." Rip stood white-faced and silent. Then, without looking at Joan, he turned and swung heavily into his saddle. Walters reached the top of the steps. As Rip turned his mounto's head, he heard a quick breath and looked down to find Joan standing at his stirrup. Her face was white. Her eyes blazed. For a moment, they stared at one another. Rip had feared this. He had avoided looking at her because he knew what he would see. "I don't want you to come back," she told him with cold, resolute distinctness. "You didn't show any signs of being anxious for gunplay when that person was here. But you're ready enough with threats for an old man. Goodbye, Rip." That was all. She turned away and left him, running hurriedly up the steps, as though fearful he might call her back. Rip stared after her with dead, lifeless eyes, and then, when she and her uncle had gone inside, he picked up his reins and started away. Chapter 3. He formed the habit of silence. He seldom swore. His stern features gave no sign of emotion. Except for the brooding dejection which slumped his wide shoulders, he might have been the same man who had ridden in the opposite direction an hour earlier, as he took his way along the south trail toward his ranch. Though he had paid no attention to Walter's mention of the Comet horses at the time, the fact that Harry Holt was missing some of his excellent stock made a deep impression. It but added to the other things. From time to time, Rip turned expressionless, thoughtful eyes southward toward the looming mesa and the canyon mouth that brooded beyond the dancing heat waves there. He had long known that he was the object of suspicion in Valle del Herbaje, but he did not blame Walters alone for the distrust that was growing. Inside the canyon mouth lived the man who had pointed out from the first that Rip must be the mysterious rustler of the valley. It was logical enough. Miller was not alone in his opinion, but Rip found it hard to account for the wealthy mine owner's venom toward him. Miller was a man heard with respect. The richest man in the territory, owner of a highly productive gold mine in the canyon, he ruled Bochera and the surrounding territory with an iron grip. Feared and disliked, Miller still was respected for his cold, ruthless power. The mine had, years before, proved too difficult to be worked by its Spanish owners. Miller had forced it to pay well by sheer brutal tenacity and courage. On the other hand, Rip was no one in particular. As he had admitted to Joan, at times when he figured it out, he could almost convince himself that he was doing the rustling in the valley. He owned a small herd, boasted a single employee, had proved his draw and the right to wear 2 guns if he chose. Beyond that, he was a stranger and suspected of being in debt. The creek along which the stolen cattle had been driven off the night before crossed Rip's land, before it lost itself somewhere under the walls of the mountain, southward where the canyon mouth met the mesa. Beyond lay the border. But this had not been the first raid on Walter's cattle, nor on Rip's either. Fortunately, a month before, Rip had herded a large consignment to Carlton Center, and he had not yet reinvested the proceeds of that sale in new stock. So his herd was small. It had seemed at that time as though the square deal might begin to pay sizable dividends at last. Rip had been hopeful. And there was Joan. Then the rustling began, in what had been a quiet, sleepy valley undisturbed for years. Rip had suffered first. Twice, small cuts of his herd had disappeared in the night without a sign. Then Walter's stock began to vanish. Walters had more to levy on. Below, past the edge of Rip's land, around the foothills sprouting east of the canyon, was the border, quick turnover and ready pay, with brand marks not analyzed. The cattle could have gone in no other direction, for northward was the sparse rim of the hills, and beyond them the desert. Westward lay Carlton Center, and only a single trail with one watering place. South, there was only the canyon trail that led to Miller's mine. Even Rip knew that, in spite of Miller's persecution of him, it was folly to suspect that a man of his wealth should be interested in cattle stealing on a small scale. Rip had come to the peaceful Valle del Herbaje a year before, and he had bought the Square D with its crescent moon brand and his own initial between the tips. He invested what little money he had in stock, hired Jim Guerin, and went to work. Silent, uncommunicative, hard-working, few men knew anything of Rip beyond the fact that he was there. If he had one friend in Bochera, it was Lou Maclin, deputy sheriff because, as he put it, if you prove once or twice that you can use your gun, Ito's the softest job in the country. But even Maclin knew little of him. Rip drank only seldom. His appearances in town were few. If he had few friends, he had as few enemies. People were not prone to dislike a man who could use 2 guns, worked hard, and minded his own business. But the rustling, provoked the ranchers to action. An investigation committee was formed, with Miller, owner of the canyon mine, at its head. Maps were studied. Geography proved a lot. At the end, Rip was summoned before the committee for questioning. His contemptuous disregard for the summons was a 9-day wonder. He did not even refuse to appear. He might never have received the crudely constructed note. The old-timers blinked, coughed, spat, and then realized that they could not make him stand before them and answer questions. But Rip had made himself talked about. Arlen Miller demanded justice, and saw in Rip's refusal to stand an unofficial investigation practical proof that he was the mysterious Rustler who had descended on the valley. And Miller's word meant a lot. But as Rip's cattle had been run off with the rest, and as there was nothing but suspicion, the matter had to end there. The rustling went on. Then Double N cattle had been chased into Square D Creek, headed toward the border, and Sam Long had been shot in the dark there. And the Comet horses. Rip shook his head, glanced toward the red-tinted walls of the canyon mouth, and turned off toward his own ranch. Jim Guerin, his face white under a mass of freckles, ran out, buckling on his gun belt, and met him at the corrals. "How'd you get here?" cut across. Rip nodded gloomily, absorbed in his thoughts. "Good you did," Guerin swore. "Get going." They took the main trail to the Double N. "After you, Wavs." The Posse, Landers's head in it, that gun fanner workin' over with Miller at the mine. They found Harry Holto's stolen horses down under the willows at the creek. "On our land?" Rip demanded. "Nothing less." "Hell, don't ask me how they got there, Rip. I know as much as you do about it. Just get going." "Theo're out for blood." "Was Harry Holt with them?" "No. He's with a searching party up in the hills. They'll quiet later, but right now, take a trip to the hills, Rip. Hole up. They'll mind the ranch. Ain't nothing to look after anyhow. Then come back day after tomorrow and straighten out with Harry. He won't believe you did that job." Rip outwardly was impassive, but his dark face had become stonier than ever. He rolled a cigarette thoughtfully, while Guerin stared up at him with imploring eyes. "Go on, will you?" "I'm going. Not to the hills, though. I'm going into Bochera. Watch things. I may not be back right away." Leaving his lone employee gaping with astonishment, Rip turned his mount and started at a loping gallop eastward to the village. Chapter 4. He stared thoughtfully at the manner in which Dick Kenton's latest brand of bourbon clung to the side of the pony glass he had filled, when Rip strolled quietly through the doorway of Kenton's Continental Hotel and Saloon. Maclin was studying, though. The place was almost completely empty, and the cool shadows of early afternoon were inviting. The worn tables, the cracked, heat-warped floor, the bar that was the pride of Bochera in its mahogany magnificence, all were part of lazy, somnolent Bochera, as it had been before the last few hectic weeks. Rip halted. "The point," Maclin was observing to the world in general, "is not so much a matter of the liquor's quality, as it is a matter of my inequality." He rambled off, for the bartender was looking over his shoulder with interested eyes. Lou Maclin turned, his hand slipping with careless ease toward his belt. Before this, the lean, lantern-jawed Maclin had proved that leaning against a bar did not spoil a good shooter's aim or lessen the speed of his draw. His lazy mask was an asset. He grunted at sight of Rip, and turned triumphantly to his audience of one behind the bar. "Hell, what ought I tell you, Dick? Didn't I tell the world in general that if anybody really wanted Rip for anything, the best bet was to wait in my office?" He whirled. "You been to my office, ain't you, Rip?" "Empty," Rip averred. "Busy?" "Not so very. Ramsey's over at Carlton Center, picking up information. I'm sheriff today." Maclin considered his friend. Rip, they was pretty sure they was going to find you and them comet horses in the same cache. Rip was serious. They found them on my land, Lou, he said softly. Understand Landers is leadin' a posse out after me now. Maclin's watery blue eyes widened. He surveyed Rip with thoughtful care. After you, Landers. Then he let out a guffaw. So you come here. He turned to the loungers in the Continental, and again confirmed his predictions. Didn't I tell them where to look for Rip? Guilty or not guilty? It was a friendly crowd. Theor after you hot, Rip, said one wizened little fellow. Miller got them all worked up, and Landers said he'd stake his pay that you'd find the comet string wherever you were. You better not let them find you while they're danders up. Rip nodded and turned again to Maclin. I wasn't quite sure what it meant, he said quietly. Landers led this gang, for me. Plenty. I'd egg on Rip, but I didn't think there was a chance of them connectin' you with this. Why, old man Walters was in this mornin'. I know. I saw him. Rip met Maclin's eyes. Harry Holt won't believe I'm in this, Lou. What shall I do? A horse slid to its haunches in front of the hitching rack, and a rider bounded into the Continental. They found each horses, he began, blinking at the unaccustomed shadows. He met Rip's eyes. His jaw fell. Hell, you're chasing him now. What are they going to do to him? Maclin asked in a voice that was suddenly cold and hard. The rider gulped. Why, string I him, I suppose. And Holt don't even know they found his horses. This is Landers and the gang, Maclin. Holto's up in the hills. Before anyone could move, Maclin had whipped out his pistol with a swift motion. It was in Rip's ribs. For a second, there was a dead silence. Rip and the deputy met eye to eye, and Maclin's eyes never faltered. Reckon I'm puttin' you under arrest, Rip, he said quietly. I plumb hope you don't object, 'cause I mean it. There was a space of silence. Then Rip nodded. Ito's your game, Lou. Go ahead, he said. Maclin jerked his head toward the door. Out, he ordered. We're marchin' to the hoosegow. In a dead silence, the two went out. The gaping loungers stared after them. In the sheriff's office, which was the street front before the tin-roofed jail, Maclin dropped into a chair and slipped the gun back into its holster. He waved his hand toward the 3 cells which opened on a narrow corridor emerging from the rear of the office. Take your pick, Rip. That last one's comfortable. I slept there one night. There's no entrance from the rear. This is a plumb up-to-date jail, and I reckon I can take care of anybody comes in the front way when Landers' gang gets back. Rip nodded shortly. What was your idea now? None yet. Maclin's eyes were suddenly keen and bright. There's dirty work here, Rip. I think Ito's best for you to be under arrest. I'd have to do it anyhow, and there's got to be a trial. But there won't be no trial if you ever get in Landers' hands or Miller's. Son, I heard them too when they started out today, and I've heard them before. Rip started to roll a cigarette, and he dropped coolly on the edge of Sheriff Ramsey's scarred desk. What was the idea, Lou? Why is Miller after me? And why is his new gunman employee leading a posse to lynch me? Maclin snorted. Think thoughto's an original question, Rip. Suppose I haven't wondered that. It was Landers who got them worked up today. Landers who volunteered to lead that gang in your direction. Know anything about him? Maclin shook his head. Better get in your cell, amigo. He got up. There's some riders coming in. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Landers' crowd. Keep your gun. He swung suddenly on his friend, and the annoyance was written plain on his homely, serious features. Next thing you'll be driving me cuckoo by asking why Miller hates you. Don't think I ain't seen it. But Ito's no good, Rip. Miller ain't stealing cattle. Thotto's real gold in his mine. And I had that proved before I'd believe it. No, the rustling coming from somewhere else. As a matter of fact, he continued aggrievedly, I can't see who it'd be but you, Rip. Rip smiled as he turned away. Thotto's one point where you and Miller and I agree. Neither can I, he said. Chapter 5. He was looking aggrievedly at the world from his position at the end of the Continental Bar. Rip had been in jail for 1 day, the first prisoner in the months of Lou's term of office. And keeping him there had not been easy. Only a reputation as a gun thrower had held off Landers's crowd the day before, until Harry Holt arrived in Betrayal. Sheriff Ramsey was still in Carlton Center on his mysterious errand. And worst, Landers had not yet been attended to. Lou was beginning to regret that a deputy cannot engage in necessary shooting. His narrowed eyes were on Landers at the moment. The man was a born gunman. His build and carriage suggested a heavy, flexed spring, except for the heavy, crouched-over shoulders that made him look like a gorilla always ready to leap. His thick eyebrows low, Maclin was not drinking, but instead he was talking fast across one of the continental tables in a corner to a group of 5 men. Lou Maclin knew without being told that conversation was weaving trouble for him and Rip. A man entered the dark doorway. Maclin sighed a little with relief when he recognized Harry Holt, the young and grave-faced owner of the Comet. Not that Harry's presence made any difference, but here, at least, was no enemy. Harry crossed quickly to where the deputy lounged acidly. His keen, cool eyes took in Landers's group in a flash. Rip still in jail? He demanded. Maclin nodded. Yes. He will be, as long as that gang's around. Hell, does Miller pay that gun fanner to sit around Betrayal all the time stirring up trouble? Harry seldom smiled. He glanced quickly at Landers again. Maybe he does, quien sabe. I've got all my horses back, but 2, Lou. Naturally, that wasn't Rip's work. Any man of sense know that if he was stealing horses, he wouldn't leave them on his own property. What was the answer? Lou looked belligerent. If you say something about maybe Miller's crooked, I'll shoot, so help me. Forget it. We've all thought of that, but Ito's impossible. Miller hates Rip, Thotto's all. Maybe he wants to buy the square D. Thotto's the worst there can be to this. But something else's happened. I just saw Garen. Some more of Rip's stock has been run off. What? Lou jerked upright. Yes. About sundown. Garen was home eating. Lou, Rip's got to get out of jail. But there's something else. Those hombres are planning a lynching bee. He jerked his head to where Landers sat. You're saying I'm a fool, and you're talking the law in their own hands since you're a friend of Rip's. He's got to get out, Lou. But where'll he go? Hell, I'm not holding him because I need rent for that cell. Harry nodded. I know. But I've got faith in Rip. He'll take care of himself. Mind getting held up for a jail delivery tonight? Lou considered. He rubbed a finger down the length of his nose, and then nodded. Come on down to the office, he said. Rip met them calmly. He had seen Holt the day before. Not from the first had he doubted that Holt would believe him. Lying at full length on a very comfortable cot, Rip let blue smoke sift through his nostrils while Harry Holt told briefly what he knew. Then the owner of Square D got to his feet. I'm going, he announced crisply. You can say what you want, Lou. This is Miller's work. I'll agree there's no visible reason, but he's back of it. But Miller ain't rustling, Lou protested. Why should he? I tell you, Thotto's real ore comes out of the canyon mine, and plenty of it. Ito's always been there. What needs he got for rustling cows? None, Rip agreed. But, does the trail from this side run all the way through the mountain? If it does, it comes out in Manico. No one's ever been through there, Holt said. Miller's house straddles the trail, and the mines are beyond. He shook his head. No, I see what you're thinking, Rip, but it brings us back to the beginning. There might be a trail through that canyon, all the way. But I know, I've found out like Lou has, there's real gold in there, plenty of it. I don't know how Ito's worked, but Ito's a real mine. And there's too much of it for Miller to even think of rustling. Ito'd be like a New York millionaire, selling shoelaces for spending money. Rip heard him out. Then he nodded. Of course, he agreed. We've got to get another answer. But whatever the answer is, I'm going to find it. Miller and his gang have put me into the wall, and I don't like to stay that way. He touched his 2 pistol butts significantly. I think I can get the drop on you, Lou. Do I go peaceable? Lou swore. Partner, if I had any money, I'd pay you to go. This jail ain't been home since you've been a prisoner. Chapter. It was a black night with no sign of a moon, but scarcely blacker than his thoughts. He tried not to think of Joan. He dared not blame her. It was too easy to see what she had seen. He knew that she had spoken as the result of a momentary passion, yet it gave him no comfort. In the society of her uncle, knowing all that was known of Rip, her attitude would scarcely alter. There was a wistful little smile on the man's hard mouth as he rode. A smile few who knew him would have recognized, as his eyes took in the familiar shape of the mesa, bulking huge in the southward dark, the willows at the creek against the white sand where the desert crept in, the huge towering front of the canyon mouth. Everything was quiet. There was peace in the Valle del Herbaje. Rip rode alone. It was a peace he had once cherished. He recalled that day, a month since, when he had pocketed the cash from his shipment westward. There had been hopes then, mighty plans. The Square D could pay, he had proved it. He had proved himself, too. Out of a life in which he had done little of which he was proud, he was beginning to make good. There was Joan, and a chance at the future. Rip had envisioned the Square D as a setting for that future. A large ranch, modern and well-equipped. Himself happy with his work and his life, and Joan there. For a month ago, he had been certain that someday she would be there. When he was able to tell her that he could offer her some part of what she deserved. How changed was everything now. Like a ghostly hand, mystery had crept into the valley and in one short month had altered everything. Rip's clenched fist struck his saddle horn as he leaned forward, about to turn up toward the Square D ranch house. When suddenly he caught a sound, borne through the rustling willows, a voice. Instinctively he caught his bridle, and even as he did so, the staccato bark of a pistol clove the silence of the night. On the heels of it came another cry, 3 more shots. Distantly, he saw the red jets of flame, incongruous in the opaque blackness. He heard confusion, calling voices, a cry of pain and agony, another shot. Then running hoofs, many of them, in a frenzy. Rip tapped his pistol butts and dug in his spurs. He was alone, yet he gave scant consideration. Mystery moved in the valley again tonight. The wind rustling past his cheeks, he tore toward it, bent far over his mounto's neck, the mane flying against his face. Another shot. Rip mounted a hillock, swooped down into a gully. A cry. Hoofs thundered past in the dark. The willows were alive. Cattle. Rip's pistol was out. He charged for the dim mass of figures that he saw. The horse plunged to its fetlocks in the shallow stream. A shot banged out, a strange voice. He felt the lead sing past his head. Then his right gun came up, and sent 4 shots into the moving mass of figures. "Get I am, Rip." Another shot. Rip reached the farther side of the stream and realized that he was a mark for bullets. He slipped sidewise out of the saddle, fired again, and felt the air filled with a wild fusillade of lead. He crouched. The cattle thundered by, vanished. Riders cried out to each other. Rip knew not where to shoot, but he was no fool. To attempt to attack whoever was ahead was folly. He took the trunk of a cottonwood for cover and waited, reloading calmly, intending to wait and then follow. It should not be too difficult. A moment of silence. A piece of singing lead clipping through the leaves, from a distance this time. Rip held his breath. Who was waiting? What lay in the palpitating dark ahead there? Suddenly a groan came to his ears, a cry that was broken off in accents of agony. He whirled. Something writhed on the ground behind him. Rip flung himself to the edge of the creek beside the body of a man. He felt blood, warm and sticky, as he touched a perspiring forehead. Then he gave a sharp exclamation. "Walters!" he cried. He forgot that there might be men waiting among the trees for a sign of him. He forgot that Walters hated him. Rip knew that his arms held a man who was dying in pain. He felt for the wound, and found a red spot in Walter's chest beside the wound in his forehead, a shot which had streaked across the skull, and which alone might not have been fatal. He threw water on Walter's face. The old rancher moaned, grunted. He murmured indistinguishable words. Rip heard him say, "Joan." He splashed more water into the wizened features. "Ito's Rip Walters," he cried. "Try and talk. You must know now I'm all right. They were shooting at me." He stopped. Walter's eyes gleamed through the dark. The lips moved in a little sound. "Yes. I know, now. Finish, Rip. Help Joan. Sorry. It was." Rip bent forward. Just one more word, only one. It was. His whole being was tensed, as though he could give that last spark of strength to the dying man in his arms. And then Walter's little figure stiffened, he coughed. He was dead. Rip clenched his teeth on a groan. A long time later he stood up, surveyed the familiar place, realized that he was on his own land. It was then that he realized that he would be branded as Roaring Walter's murderer. Chapter 7. He had spent a sleepless night. He had not dared sleep. The morning was well advanced when his worn pony slid down a sand embankment, mounted a little crest, and halted wearily just above the Double N ranch house. No one had arrived there yet. Possibly the body was not yet back. Rip had sent Jim Guerin out with the news. He had met Jim on the way to the ranch, for the cowboy had heard the shooting at the creek. The hills and the desert were being scoured. Rip had no illusions. He knew that this morning he was branded as a murderer and a rustler as well, that few would disbelieve the assumption that his feud with Walters had come to a head at last. It would be hard to disbelieve, in the face of his escape from jail, in the face of the warnings and rantings of Miller and his crowd, and after the denunciations Walters himself must have uttered when last in town. Rip's weary eyes took in the bulk of the silent ranch house. Would she believe? He remembered Walter's words. Lifelessly, he picked up his reins and let the pony amble along. He had no plans. He had not dared to think of them in the night. He wanted to see Joan first. He was not afraid of Stubby. Stubby would have to be convinced that Rip had killed his boss. And the only other employee of the short-handed Double N was in bed with a bullet wound. Joan emerged from the rear door on the heels of the little Chinese cook. She had a bucket in her hand. As she caught sight of Rip, his back to the saffron skyline, riding slowly toward her, the bucket dropped. The Oriental took one look and dove through the screen door. Joan stood pallid and very brave when Rip halted. Steady eyes, deep in misery, searched his face. He could tell nothing of her thoughts. I had to see you, Joan, Rip said hoarsely. You've heard about it, of course. She nodded. Jim Guerin came over. The sheriff's on his way from Carlton Center, and there's a posse. For me. His little smile was bitter. So they said, she replied simply. Rip towered over her, and she could see the deep, worn lines in his face, the misery in his eyes. I don't know whether I'll let them get me or not, he said slowly. It depends. I came to find out, Joan. Do you believe this? Any of it? She studied him. He could sense the strain she was under, the agony that repression cost her. She was suffering from pent-up emotions that must soon be loosed, or she would be in hysteria. Does it matter? She began, and then he saw her lips tremble and the suspicion of a tear on her long lashes. She burst out, Oh, don't ask me. Don't ask me anything. How can I know? I can't think. Please go away, Rip, please. He stood silent. All right, Joan, he breathed after a moment. Wide-eyed, quivering, she reached out her hands in an impulsive gesture. Don't let them find you, Rip, for my sake, she pleaded. She could read the decision in his eyes. Please don't. When this is over, give me a chance to think. Oh, Rip, I'm so lonely all of a sudden. Do you suppose I want to believe this? He nodded gravely. All right, Joan. I'll come back. Suddenly, a new purpose came into his eyes. The dejection left him. If I can once get free of them, I'm going to find out what all this means. He rode away. There was no more to be said. Just as he turned into the lower trail southward, Joan saw a file of riders crest the ridge over which he had come. But he was out of sight. The men drove their weary ponies down toward the ranch house. All that day, riders wound across ridges. Bochera was deserted. From the west, Sheriff Ramsey was returning post-haste, but he had not yet arrived. The roads were being scoured. The border was being watched, but it was generally believed by midday that Rip had got across the line before daylight. I hope he has, grunted Lou Maclin, as a tired group of 7 men paced their mounts dejectedly across a dusty, sand-swept trail barely distinguishable, heading toward a dried arroyo. Maclin rode last, carelessly. But from the beginning, he had attached himself to Landers and his gang. There were 2 more of Miller's employees among the 7 men, and the gunfighter rode ahead. He turned at Maclin's words, murderous blue-gray eyes fixed upon the deputy out of an expressionless face carved with set lines of mingled weariness and purpose. Yeah, I told save trouble, Maclin, if he has. When we see that hombre this time, he ain't going to have no chance to escape from jail. Meanin' what? Maclin drawled easily. Meanin', sneered Landers, that I'm right glad the sheriff's comin' back. Only if I find Rip first, even Ramsey won't have a chance at him. A low growl came from the throats of his adherents. Maclin puffed at a cigarette long since gone out. Thoughto's liable to mean shootin' Landers, talkin' that way. 'Cause as a deputy sheriff, ito's my duty to see that Rip stands a fair trial. Did you ever happen to think, any of you prairie dogs, that we ain't even had a coroner's jury yet? There's no law says Walters was murdered. Landers laughed harshly. No law but this law, he said, and slapped his 2 guns. They rode on in a weary silence, too weary even to quarrel. Maclin kept his eyes on Landers's back. One at a time, they wound into the arroyo. Trees hid them as they filed through. Maclin came last, and jerked up his head soundlessly as a pebble struck between his shoulder blades. Cinches loose, he grunted wearily to the man ahead of him, and dismounted, fumbling with a buckle. The rest passed on. He surveyed the arroyo. "All right, Rip," he drawled. "Reckon you can come out." "They might be watching," came a voice from behind a rotted stump covered with scraggly bush. "What's the best way to get away, Lou?" "Hole up till night. Cut across the border about tomorrow daylight," Maclin said easily. "You can't make it right now, and you're scouring all the country. Deserto's the only safe place." "Got any money?" "Had no chance. Holt knows where it is, but I can't get back." "Meet me here just before daybreak," Maclin said. Then he swore. "Hell, Rip, that Landers is suspicious. If you got a horse here, get going pronto. If you haven't, take mine. He's coming back." There was a wild scramble among the bushes. Evidently, Rip had his horse further down the arroyo bed. Maclin, dropping his useless cigarette with a wrench, broke the end of his cincha and stood there swearing picturesquely when Landers burst into the glade. The eyes of the two men met. Landers turned with a triumphant, vengeful look. "Scatter, boys," he said. "And ride. Reckon we're on a hot trail this time." He slapped his mounto's rump with his sombrero. "Here's luck with that cincha, Maclin." Chapter 8. The Cantina was called the Line Rest, though it was owned by a mannequin. It was at the point where two trails met, and at the point where the trails ran closest to the shallow stream that crossed the international line under the shadow of the Sierras del Badia. A sleepy little place, patronized on rare occasions by wandering riders who happened that way in search of strays, or by travelers on one of the roads. To such as these, it might have borne Kenton's title of continental, for the trails were only harder sand, and the foothills of the Sierras westward might have been a mirage. Desert stretched south to where a stream emerged, and crossed the border at a crooked, careless angle. The Line Rest was the only sign of shade or shelter in miles of sweltering desert, where, if cattle strayed, they were doomed. In a tiny room in the rear of this cantina sat Joseph Gruman. Gruman's hand held a leather dice cup, and there was a tall glass of uniced whiskey and water in front of him. His shirt was open. His hair was in disarray. He sprawled carelessly and sat eyeing the dice cup. "Oiga!" His fist pounded on the table. A peon boy hastened in and closed the door, giving a momentary glimpse of the quiet shadows of a bar, and of old Ricardo leaning in his favorite posture across its top, staring out over the heat-hazed desert. 4 times that day, riders had paused before the cantina and demanded of Ricardo if a lone Americano had been there. They had seen Groomman and passed him by contemptuously. Groomman studied the boy grimly and then held out the dice cup. The muchacho stood in evident awe of this mad caballero who had decided he would stay at Ricardo's place. "You will cast these for me, Enrique," Groomman said. He was smiling. The boy shivered at the smile. "If I cast them myself, I might change the decision." "Si, senor." "Probably," Groomman said grimly. "You will never have a more important task in your sun-baked existence. For if the first roll is highest, a man dies. Have you any idea who the man will be?" "No, senor." "Of course not. If the second roll is highest, a man loses his pride, humbles himself before a beautiful lady, and tries to be honest by doing filthy work." "Si, senor." "And if the third roll is highest, oiga, muchacho, our friend El Latigazo across the line gains a most excellent friend and segundo. Of course, you don't understand." "No, senor, but I—" "It isn't necessary. Please roll these dice. 3 rolls. And say neither yes nor no anymore." The boy took the cup in trembling hands. Manifestly, this strange-looking man was truly mad. A revolver muzzle slipped through the jalousies of the half-opened window. "You will remain as you are, amigo, or get shot." Rip's chaps came over the sill, and he sat there. His shirt was torn, and his face was streaked with sweat and sand. He showed every evidence of having ridden hard and long, and in his eyes was a deadly, hunted look. Gruman stared without outward surprise. Then recognition leapt into his eyes. "Ito's Rip," he exclaimed. "They've been hunting you." "Exactly." Rip was not friendly. "They got my horse, and they'll be here in a minute or two. It happens to be a matter of killing someone else or dying myself. I hope you understand that. I want to hide when they come." He nodded toward the bar. "Ricardo didn't see me come. They'll look in here. I'm going to hide up there." He indicated a dusty shelf slightly higher than a man's head, on which was an old saddle, a saddlebag, some aged newspapers, and a few paper-bound books. "I'll have my gun on you," he went on lifelessly, dryly. "When they come, you'll either tell them you haven't seen me, or," he shrugged, "it won't matter, but you'll probably get the first shot." Gruman stared, quite imperturbed. Slowly, his mocking lips commenced to smile. "I don't know whether I'll let you shoot me, and thus solve the problem, or not," he murmured. Rip's head came up. "Then Theor after you, to kill you?" Gruman asked. "Yes." The foreigner frowned. "Outlaw, yea." He gave a little laugh. "What superb irony, I think." The creak of saddle leather, the jingle of bits, came out of the panting stillness of the desert. Rip got to his feet, his six-gun at his hip. Gruman stopped short and raised his head. "Get up there," he said. "We'll talk afterward." His careless figure suddenly took on life. "You, muchacho, roll those dice as I said, and if you say one word I shall probably kill you." A moment later, the group of men outside could be heard dismounting. A roaring voice bellowed at Ricardo. In the rear room, they could hear the little mannequins chattering denials of all knowledge. A man poked a head through the window, a pistol preceding him, and grunted as Gruman, watching the dice, smiled up at him. Someone opened the door, swore violently, and a moment later glasses were clinking on the bar. In a little while, the posse had ridden off. "I think you may come down," Gruman said quietly. "The dice seem to have chosen. It would have been bucking fate to let you kill me. It wasn't written that way. Rip, I'm heading across the border tonight. You'd better come along." Chapter 9. Rip and Gruman reached the arroyo where the former had come closest to capture in the long, bitter day of manhunt. It was well after midnight when they got there, and picketing their horses, they crouched among the willows and the juniper to wait for Maclin's arrival. Rip had gathered enough about his newfound companion to mistrust him. Not that there was any cowardice, or anything sneaking or mean about Gruman, as he called himself. On the contrary. Yet cold-bloodedly he would flinch before nothing. Nothing mattered but his own ends. Believing neither God nor man, he would be a dangerous, merciless enemy, but a friend only as long as it suited his needs to be so. "I've got to get out of this country," he told Rip frankly. "So do you. They haven't anything on me yet, but they will have when Sheriff Ramsey gets back. He's been getting my record, and I happen to be wanted by a sheriff outside of Yuma. I ought to have known better than to attempt a hold-up, but I had little choice." He spoke calmly, coolly, as though his only regret lay in his own blundering of the job. A man had been killed, but that was unimportant. "I had to have money, you see," he said with a shrug. "I've been accustomed to it. You've gathered that I'm not from this country. I'm not. My right name is von Steglitz, and I was a cavalry officer. I can never go back home. That'll all you'll need to know, and all you will know, Rip." Rip nodded carelessly. "The point is, what do we do in Manico?" he said. "I've got work to do. I'm going to clear up this mess here. I've got to. And Manico isn't a pleasant place for lone gringos." We shan't be alone. El Latigazo. Rip started. El Latigazo. Thoughtos, one of Villa's ex-lieutenants with a fancy name. The lash. What's he doing? I don't know what he's doing, Gruman said calmly. He might be the mysterious Rustler about here, though looking at a geography makes one doubtful. He could hardly raid so frequently and get across the border each time without a trace. Rip shook his head. Not unless he has a hole up somewhere about here. He hasn't, Gruman said. He wouldn't even come across to meet me. I'm to join him in a tiny town called La Victoria, just across the way. If it isn't Rustling, then what's the game? Rip demanded. I don't know, Gruman smiled. It'll be better than dangling at the end of a rope, though, which is what's due for both of us here. And you may get a line on what all this mysterious about. Not if they know who I am. Look here, Gruman was suddenly in earnest. I've got no scruples about anything. If I chuck in with El Latigazo, I stay put. If you find he's an enemy, I automatically become your enemy as soon as you menace me. But until I am personally in danger, I'll give you my word of honor that I'll stand with you, and that El Latigazo will never learn who you are. He needs fast gunfighters, and I've heard of you. I'd like to feel those 2 guns of yours were alongside me too. Thoughtos, the proposition. Care to take it? Rip frowned. Lifeless eyes swept the endless waste of desert, recalling like a mirror the scenes of the hot, unending day just past. Hunted. No, he had to cross the line. He had to gather breath for the work ahead of him. Perhaps across there he would find a clue, for it was certain that the stolen cattle had crossed the line. He did not know yet what Latigazo might be engaged in, so he could make no definite choice now. For the present, Gruman's plans coincided with his own. I'll cross with you, he said briefly. And while we're being frank, my sentiments are about the same as yours, I reckon. He thought of Joan. Gruman must have had the same thought, for he looked up with a mocking smile. I gathered they would be, he said. I had almost forgotten that morning. Rip's eyes were cold. It might be better if we did forget that morning, he said. Both of us. Gruman looked at him. He started to smile, and then the smile died. He said nothing. But the mocking light fled his eyes. They started shortly afterward for the arroyo. Side by side, their mounts picketed a little distance away. They had been lying there for an hour, while the moon waned slowly, when from the desert trail they heard the creak of saddle leather and the soft footfalls of a cow pony, before the shifting, betraying light revealed Maclin coming alone. Rip's hand left his gun. He did not go out. He waited until the deputy entered the concealing shadows of the depression. Then he called softly. All right, Lou. I've got someone with me. Come on. Maclin came to a halt and slipped from the saddle with a long sigh. He mopped his face and acknowledged by a nod Rip's introduction of Gruman. Did Jim find the money? Rip demanded. Yes. But Maclin made no move to deliver it. I've got it. Gosh, they sure are after you hot, Rip. Miller and Landers ain't let up for a minute, but now that Ramsey is back, I ain't so put to it. What does Ramsey think? Took my word for it. Admits there's funny work somewhere. He's a white man, all right. That's why I'm free right now. Free? What do you mean? Free to come with you. I still got my star, but Ramsey said I could light out. I'm on the trail of rustlers, and I've got a hunch that if I follow you, I might see what I'm looking for. Hell, Rip, I always did hate mysteries, and I ain't gonna be able to take my job with the ease I'm entitled to till this thing's cleaned up. Rip swore. He was not misled by Maclin's careless words. This man was his friend, going with him into exile in the hope that he might aid him. But good Lord, Lou, do you realize where we're going? We're heading to join a bad hombre calling himself El Latigazo across the line. Heard of him, agreed Maclin calmly. But he ain't the Rustler. I figured that all out. He couldn't make raids like these. We don't know what he's doing, Rip protested. But I told be a dangerous play, Lou. Hell, Lados, get going. Lou got wearily to his feet. Here's your dinero. I think we can slip across about now and be reasonably safe. Chapter 10. Hours afterward, the border was left behind, and late that morning the three silent riders came to a watering place where wearied horses and men were forced to call a halt. La Victoria is over westward of here, Maclin said. We can make it by night. Right now, I'm sleepin'. The heat was terrific. From the wide expanse of shimmering sand, billowing in dunes and drifts, heat devils danced upward joyously. Here and there, a lone cactus stuck imploring arms out toward a pitiless sky. The horizon was one with the heat waves and the white sky. They ate sparingly. Starved though they were, the heat was too terrific to make the dry food taste well. With no conversation, the three rolled into the palm shade and slept. It was Rip who awakened first, oppressed by the idea that he was being stared at. He first saw a pistol muzzle, the weapon resting comfortably across a blue-clad elbow. Behind the muzzle was a brutal, heavily bearded face with cruel, sardonic lips and a pair of cruel eyes. Beside this one man, sitting his horse, two mannequins had dismounted and held rifles carelessly. Rip sat up. Stay where you are, partner. The pistol moved. Don't go reaching for those guns, you won't never get to them. The mannequins, villainous looking enough, but mild in comparison with the huge bulk and animal ferocity of their leader, drew back as simultaneously Maclin and Gruman stirred at the voice. Both remained frozen, half rising from the ground. But neither made a move. The stubble-bearded one grinned. Just ran across you, but I hated to wake you. Maybe you'll tell me what you're doing hereabouts. Groomman sat up thoughtfully. Yes, maybe we will, he agreed coolly. The chances are we won't. Who are you? I'm back of this gun, and that says I don't have to answer questions. I'm repeatin' mine. Groomman got coolly to his feet and strolled over toward the big man. I don't know who you are, nor what you want, but if I'm guessing right, you're in for trouble unless you stop this tin soldier business. I'm looking for El Latigazo. At the name, the evil-looking mannequin crowded forward with guns cautiously raised, and the eyes behind the revolver flickered in momentary surprise. Then a mirthless grin came over the man's cruel features. So, you know names and everything. Well, partner, you may be right or wrong, but Thotto's where you're going right now. El Latigazo ain't expectin' visitors. He's expecting me. If you know anything about his business, you know it, Gruman challenged coolly. Rip saw the man glance at the mannequins, as though speculating on the effects of these words. His eyes were red-rimmed in their depths, and his thick brows drew down. I know as much about his business as I want to, he growled. He's expectin' one man. I'm the man. Gruman walked carelessly toward the others. These are friends. The gunman looked suspicious. What are you ussin' for a name? He demanded. None for you. I don't like your manners. Take me to the boss, Gruman went on quickly, or you're going to be sorry you ever found this watering place. For a moment, Rip held his breath. Maclin remained tense, poised. They knew this was not a bluff. Gruman could not help act his part. He had no more fear than if he was bulletproof, and his own life mattered to him nothing at all. The other man's figure seemed to tighten. His trigger finger trembled. His eyes were narrow and burning. For a long moment, he remained silent. Then his eyes swept his three captives. "Partners, you're sure going to like it at our camp," he said. "Consider me like a welcome in committee. I'm Jones, and the handle stays. After you're acquainted," and his eyes dwelt evilly on Gruman now, "we're going to get together frequent like. I ain't to let you know a lot about me." He signaled to his companions. The horses were already bridled. The three were stripped of their weapons and bidden to mount. They started, the man calling himself Jones bringing up the rear in a glowering silence. Rip knew they had made their first enemy, but Groomman seemed utterly oblivious to it. La Victoria was a sleepy collection of shacks that only irony could have named a town. There was no post office. Bony curs infested the single street, on which there was a lone general store, a bar, and a board front labeled hotel, the hotel label almost lost under a mass of placards and announcements. Mildly curious inhabitants, scantily clothed, watched the 6 men ride into the street toward sundown and silently proceed toward the Cantina. Here there were more men. Most of them were mannequins. All were heavily armed with knives as well as pistols, and there was a sullen, suspicious air over everything. Jones halted in the entrance. "Este el jefe aquí." Rip's eyes were on the nearby hitching rack while Jones conversed with those inside the barroom. Slowly his eyelids narrowed. Maclin was sitting his saddle beside him, and Rip reached out casually to touch his hand. The Deputy's gaze followed his. There at the rack was a black thoroughbred, lean of shank, slim of leg, bearing an ornately carved mannequin saddle studded with silver, holding a gaily colored holster for both rifle and pistol at either side. On the animal's rump was a neat comet, the brand mark of Harry Holto's comet string. He branded the breeders, of course, though never the young stock. Maclin inclined his head slowly. "We stay. Sit tight. We've hit the right place, and we're not leaving till we know the answer." Gruman swore at the delay in the barroom. "I gather your boss isn't here yet," he told Jones. "I'm going in and have a drink. Anyone joining me?" Jones stared, then smiled grudging approval. The others swung from their saddles and entered the saloon. At the bar, the curious, hard-eyed loungers made way for the newcomers and scrutinized them carefully. It was a hard-looking lot, mannequins and Americans alike. Jones chuckled to one of his countrymen at his elbow. "The new hombres buying, boys. Looks like the boss is trying to raise an army again." Someone swore gruffly. "We need an army these days. But it ain't gonna do no harm to make sure who it is wants to join it." There was a growl and a shifting of feet in assent. Gruman tossed off a drink calmly, and Rip turned, suddenly aware of a silence which fell upon the barroom. Jones turned. His smile was menacing, and his eyes were not pleasant. The others turned by common consent toward the door, where a slim, fastidious young mannequin, gaudy in embroidered vestido, silver spurs, slashed wide trousers, and stiff-brimmed sombrero, leaned carelessly surveying the gathering. "Here's the boss," Jones snarled. "Maybe you know him. Perez, is somebody getting yeller around here that we have to recruit a young army?" The mannequin's handsome, delicate eyebrows rose, and slowly he straightened up. His eyes flashed over the newcomers. He dropped his cigarette. "I do not expect these men," he said softly, and in that instant Rip knew that his life was worth very little indeed. Chapter 11. Yanez moved forward, unimpressed by the tense silence, the hands that hovered over pistol butts, the instinctive indrawing motion of the crowd that surrounded him. "You expected me, El Latigazo," he said. "I had word from you at Carlton Center." He hesitated, then added, "In Kavalov's Cantina." "Ah," El Latigazo nodded slowly. "You are Gruman, let us say. But these others?" Gruman smiled. They were going the same way, and there was a posse at their heels. You can take them or leave them, but you've got nothing to do. It was his carelessness which won. That, and the look of the two men left against the bar. Rip's cold face and colder eyes, his powerful physique, and his silent, immobile demeanor spoke volumes. Lou Maclin, smaller, more wiry beside him, looked like half of a dangerous combination. "We ask not many questions here," El Latigazo said. "What names have you chose?" Rip did not smile. He jerked his head at Maclin. "His name's Jones," he announced boldly. "And mine is Jones." He heard a little gasp of anger, and the first Jones jerked up his eyes, glowering. Someone laughed. Then El Latigazo joined the laugh, softly. "Bueno," he exclaimed. "Hold up, Jones, yet. I have understand that the name is a frequent one in the estados. It muse be for all who come here, have it. We have had many baptisms, to prevent confusion, senores. If you will be interested to join us, merely for convenience, we would give you new names." Rip nodded, without a smile. "I suppose we all understand one another," he said. "Jones and I have need of work, but we're looking for money too." "If you will work, there is dinero," the jefe promised. His suave manner altered. He was suddenly, Rip realized, a lot like the lash he had taken for a name. "If you do not work, if you fail, we have no use for you here, sabe. There is enough work and money for all, but all muse do his share. Those who fail, we do not like to have go away from here wito what they know. That never happens. I am sure you understand, Mr. Jones." Rip nodded. "Comprendo," he said shortly. "Do we get our guns back?" Jones, the first Jones, snarled. "Ain't we got enough hands digging into what we make now, Perez? And how in hell do we know who these hombres are? I got a hunch." "You will keep your ideas, amigo," interrupted El Latigazo softly, sibilantly. "These gentlemen cannot think of treachery. They would not be so mad. They would die too horribly, as they know. Treachery, amigo mio," he went on, with a pointed threat in the voice that held the big man still, "is something to be avoided with El Latigazo. Remember that." He turned away carelessly, nodding first at Gruman and then mockingly at Rip. "There is room for you at our camp," he said. "Your excellent namesake will show you." He went out. Gruman smiled. "Charming place here. Home-loving crowd and all that. About the only thing thoughto's not a signal for guns is an offer to buy a drink. And tonight, I shall feel peaceful." He started back to the bar. Rip strapped on his gun belt, with a feeling of relief. He saw the American, Jones, watching him with thoughtful, unfriendly eyes. The man managed to range beside him at the bar. "Two guns mean business, partner," he drawled. "In these parts, a man's got to be ready to prove he can hold up their weight." Rip met the red gimlet eyes, coolly. "I've known that for some time," he agreed, "and I'm still wearing them." Jones hesitated. Rip's cold gaze never wavered. There was something deadly in his expressionless face, his habitual disinclination to talk. "Yeah," Jones surprised him. "Reckon you ought to know this part of the country. I've seen you somewhere hereabouts, recent." Maclin let his fingers hook into his gun belt. Groomman appeared not to hear. Rip was turning round and round his whiskey glass, making concentric circles on the sloppy bar top. He knew what Jones' words meant. He knew that recognition would spell instant death. In some way, this band of El Latigazovs was connected with the rustling that had been going on across the line. There was still a mystery to it, but Holto's brand outside was betraying, hard to be denied. And once these men connected Rip with the square D, he was lost. He and Maclin both. Speed with a gun would not count against their numbers. Sheer fear would send them upon him, to blot him and what knowledge he had gained from the earth. But no sign of this reasoning appeared on his face. He met the gunman's gaze squarely. "Jones gets to a lot of places," he said. "Maybe we're in the same family, amigo." There was a sharp laugh that spread along the listeners at the bar. Names, as Latigazo had suggested, did not mean a great deal here. Jones seemed not too popular in his bullying, heavy-handed fashion. He nodded and downed his drink. Then he turned away. "Any time you hombres want to know where you bunk," he said, "I'm ready to hit the camp." Chapter 12. Yanez came into the little tent where Rip was bent over the task of cleaning out his revolver barrels, and this time he halted gravely. Lou Maclin lay sprawled on a bunk, dozing off the heat-filled hours of the afternoon. They had been in the camp of El Latigazo for a week, but had learned almost nothing. Rip looked up and saw that Gruman had learned something unpleasant. The ex-cavalryman dropped down on the cot beside him. Finally, he said, "Jones knows your name." Rip started. Gruman took a cigarette and in a moment continued, "I've just come from La Victoria, that cantina." He was pretty drunk, raving about El Latigazo and his methods. Spoke of crossing the line and rustling. Then he stopped short. I heard him curse, and he said, "By God square D," but he didn't say any more. Asked a minute later where Perez was, and I slipped out. Rip considered. "He dislikes all of us," he said at last. "Aims at Latigazov's job too. Once he lets out what he knows." His eyes narrowed. They met Grumman's even stare, and Gruman nodded. "Perez is not by his shack," he said softly. "Jones'll reach there any minute." Rip inclined his head abruptly. He gave a rag a final jerk and pulled it through the barrel of his gun. Then, breaking open the cylinder, he slipped in his cartridges methodically. Standing up, he twirled the barrels, slipped the two guns in and out of their sheaths with movements that lighted a spark of admiration in Grumman's eyes. "If Lou wakes up," said Rip calmly, "tell him where to find me." "Shall I go along?" "No. This is a lone job. It mustn't look like a party. I'll be back in a minute." Rip faced the burning sunlight of mid-afternoon like a man who has a disagreeable task to complete as soon as possible. There was a methodical coldness in his manner as he rounded a cabin standing before their tent and started across a sort of open sandy square upon which the hastily put-up shacks faced. There had been nothing startling about the camp of Perez, who called himself El Latigazo. It was, in reality, not a camp. At the edge of La Victoria, some road builders of a former administration had once thrown up some tin-roofed board shacks. One was a cookhouse, used as a general dining hall for Perez's meager following, and 3 or 4 more were simply barren one-room affairs. Behind the grayish collection, the bulk of the foothills arose crimson or gray according to the slant of the sunlight, and the canyon which opened on the American side might have been continued to here, for Rip had discovered what certainly looked like an entrance. But it seemed to lead nowhere. The camp was quiet. It had been thus for the past week. Quarrels had been rife, the men snarling and cursing. Idleness never improved matters in a place like this. But as he rounded the mess shack, Rip caught an instant glimpse of a group of 5 or 6 men near Perez's quarters. He saw the slim figure of the outlaw chief and the burly shoulders of Jones. There was something cat-like about his tread as he crossed the square. He halted close by and unnoticed as he caught Jones' thick voice. "No jobs, nothing but layin' around. No dinero. And we take on 3 more Americanos that we don't know too much about. El Latigazo, I'm callin' a showdown." Rip's eyes narrowed. He heard a low, uncertain growl from the listeners gathered about the 2 men. Perez was like a taut wire, his dark eyes menacing, wary. Rip realized that he and his identity were but a part of all this scene, that Jones was using him as the ladder by which he intended to dethrone El Latigazo and assume command of the band. A showdown, Perez purred. And just when and how will you have it, amigo? His taloned fingers were poised at his waist. Jones hesitated. Right soon, jefe, he growled. Pronto. Do you know who these new hombres are? I am satisfied. Well, I'm not. Not satisfied with them, or with the way things are being run around here. He broke off. Rip had waited as long as it was feasible. Now he stepped forward lightly, his eyes only for Jones. His right elbow pushed a man from his path, and he was suddenly facing the bully across a cleared space. I reckon Ito's me you don't like, Jones, his voice cut in harshly. Here's your chance to settle it, pronto, like you said. There was a quick breath. Men moved sidewise. Perez's deep eyes burned as he crouched. Jones whirled, and as he met Rip's blank eyes, his own took sudden flame. For a moment, rage mastered him, and his first purpose was forgotten. You're dead right, damn your soul, he cursed. And here's to settle it. Rip was smiling, a cold, deadly smile. As Jones spoke, he was watching the gunman's hands fall down to his belt. The big wooden grip pistols sprang from their sheaths. There was a roar of flame. Red jets burned in streaks through the gray of powder smoke. 4 shots. The smoke blew past Rip's face, and his smile had not altered. They had not seen his hands. It was as if the pistols had leapt forward, and he had caught them slightly above his waist in midair. Jones was swaying. Weakened fingers loosed their grip on his guns. They fell. His knees crumpled. There was silence. The smoke before him eddied away as his big frame plunged through it, and he struck the ground on his face, unmoving. Rip's guns circled. I reckon you all saw that, he said calmly. Anybody question that I was right? Perez was watching him with an odd smile. You were entirely right, he said. He went for his guns first. The others nodded, some reluctantly. But that the shooting had been fair enough, all agreed. El Latigazo stirred the dead figure with a contemptuous foot. He talked like a child, he said. He died like a child, Wito pop guns that he thought he could use. As for you, his eyes swept the circle of men, you will have work and money within 2 or 3 days. Work and money, and plenty of danger since you like it so well. Rip sheathed his guns and stood looking at a hole in his chaps which was beginning to look damp. Perez saw it. We will look at it in my house, he said. Come Wito me, senor, he smiled. You may be Jones now, since you have removed the obstacles. The others watched them move off. Rip limped a little. One of Jones' bullets, he found, had gone through the flesh of his calf, and it was bleeding considerably. But it was a clean wound. He sterilized and bandaged it without trouble. Perez sat watching him, smoking one of his inevitable long brown cigarillos. Chapter 13. Perez finished his cigarette and lit another. Rip sat up. The leader still had his eyes on him. It is probable that you saved my life today, he said. Jones was ready to kill me, and I am not too good with the draw. Rip nodded. He was no friend of mine, he replied coolly. No. Rip did not meet El Latigazov's eyes, as that long drawl came out meaningly. Did the leader guess? One could tell little from his expression. Jones was a kind of segundo, a lieutenant to me, he continued after a moment. Only, he had too much ambition. You have said little of yourself, Senor Jones. Do you intend to stay with us? Rip looked up. If it pays, he retorted. It will pay. You may be valuable. You will stay here, Wito me. I didn't know there was any other place to stay, returned Rip, slightly puzzled. There is. In a night or two, you will see. Gruman will go on. He will stay in the canyon. Rip was glad of his expressionless features then. So, there was something in the canyon. Something that connected that mysterious place with El Latigazo. He wanted desperately to ask for more information. "I suppose you'll tell me what you're talking about when you're ready," he remarked dryly. "Exactly. Groomman is needed elsewhere. You and your friend will stay here, Wito me." Jones, the first Jones, could shoot and fight, but he was a child. "You have brains. It is not good to think too much, but if you will think when it is necessary, we should continue very well." Rip nodded. At that instant, a horse drew up outside, and a sweaty mannequin swung down before the open door of the shack. El Latigazov's eyes lighted. "It is he whom I expect," he said as he got to his feet. "Shall I go?" "No, stay. You would learn soon anyway." The man came in. "What is the word?" Perez demanded eagerly. "All will be ready in 2 nights," said the man in Spanish. "Senor Miller's men will meet us in the gulch." Cattle. Perez, fortunately, did not look at Rip when Miller's name came. He seemed so interested that he appeared scarcely to notice its mention. "Not now." The mannequin hesitated, glanced at Rip, and then added, "The other." "Bueno. Is there any other news?" The man laughed. "See. El Jefe Miller becomes young. There is a lady, Hermosa, beautiful. The lady of the double N, Senor Miller, becomes a child. The double N, he has humor." Rip's face froze. Through him went a pain and an agony that in its very repression brought beads of sweat to his forehead. He wanted to cry out, to leap up with both his guns blazing, to curse. Yet he sat there while El Latigazo, laughing, flicked the ash from his cigarette and turned to him. "You understand, Senor Jones? She is beautiful, this lady. I have seen her. And what our chief wants, he gets. Always." Rip shook his head. He had recovered by now. "I have heard of them both," he said, and got up. "There will be a messenger at sundown of the day after tomorrow," said the rider on departing. "The shipment will come up here before then. The messenger will tell you that all is well." Alone with Perez again, Rip started toward the door. The chief halted him. "You have heard things, Senor Jones. I have trusted you a little. Be wise, and remember that the greatest knowledge is to him who keeps it." Rip went out, directly to the tent he and Maclin occupied with Gruman. The latter, immediately he had heard the results of the shooting, had joined in a game of 3-card Monte in one of the shacks. Maclin was alone. When Rip came in, he threw himself onto his cot and swore. "Get news. Heard you got honored special and taken to the big teepee." "News plenty," Rip exclaimed. "I don't know what it all means, but this gang's working with Miller all right. We're taking some kind of shipmento into the canyon night after tomorrow and meeting his men. I got that." Maclin whistled. "So Ito's Miller. And there's a way through the canyon. But what kind of a shipment?" "Thato's what I didn't learn. Ito's got me, Lou. What ought they be sending into the States from here? And what has it got to do with the rustling? You're not rustling cows into the States. Miller don't need to rustle cows. I've said that to myself till I'm tired, Rip. And the amount of cows rustled from our territory. Even if the Utah got the herd you found, cut out in the upper valley by the spring, those cows ain't enough to keep an organization like this and make it pay for Miller. Besides, what I'm interested in is the way through the canyon. I couldn't find any. Nor I. We'll find it now, though. It'll be all we need, I'm thinking. Once we know what's up, and we'll learn that when we move and have the way through the canyon, we can ride back to Bochera and square up accounts." But Rip still looked gloomy. "There's more," he managed to say at last. More. Gruman, you mean? Yes, we'll have to have a showdown with him. Maybe his crime ain't so bad, but what if he threw in with us and turned state's evidence? He won't. He's not that kind. But I'm not thinking of Groomman. The man that brought the news said Miller was getting young again on account of a girl, the lady of the double N. Maclin swore, and then both men sat in utter blank silence. This near, they had come to a solution of the mystery. And yet, at this point, they found themselves unable to penetrate further. There was nothing to be said, and for the present, nothing to be done. Chapter 14. She was eager about the forthcoming interview. She had met Miller twice before. The last time had been on the occasion of her first appearance in town after her uncle's death and Rip's escape. She had gone to see Sheriff Ramsey and had found Arlen Miller there, a big, powerful man of handsome physique, but with bushy reddish-yellow eyebrows that met over the bridge of his nose, and bushy hair of the same color. There was a scar along the side of his heavy nose that seemed to crush in the bones at that side of his face. With heavy cordiality, he expressed his sorrow at her uncle's death. But Joan and her uncle had never been close, and she disliked hypocritical displays of grief. She had been shocked and saddened at the catastrophe, but something about the owner of the canyon mines repelled her. I came to ask about Rip, she told the sheriff. Has he been found guilty? I've got a warrant for him, said the grave-faced Ramsey when she halted. He broke jail, and there's a lot of circumstantial evidence against him. On top of it, he's run off. He'll have to stand trial. And there won't be much doubt about what the trial'll say, Miller added grimly. You think he's guilty, then? Joan asked coldly. Everybody does. Are you an exception? Laughed Miller. Perhaps. I can't seem to condemn anyone in advance. We were just talking about you, Miller hastened to interpose. That ranch of yourn is going to be a big proposition for a lone girl. I was figuring I'd make you an offer on it if you're interested. She shook her head. Thank you, I haven't considered selling yet. The chill in her voice prohibited further discussion. Maybe when things quiet down, Ramsey put in gently. They've been quiet, Miller grunted, ever since Rip skipped. He got up. Anyhow, Miss Walters, I hope you'll remember I'm sort of a neighbor. Any time I can help in any way, let me know, he ate. His colorless eyes roved over the trim slenderness of her figure. They rested with a speculative eagerness on her face, a dissembling look in them that made her wonder what lay behind them. Stubby had absented himself for 2 days. Now he confronted his mistress. Ma'am, he said nervously, slapping a battered sombrero against his chaps. I been over everything, and I'm plumb sure Rip had nothing to do with that rustling. The eagerness with which she raised her head, the light of hope sparkling in her eyes, betrayed her casual words. Is that so, Stubby? Are you sure? It just can't be so, Stubby averred. That creek where we found the steers twice movin'. If Rip had them, he'd have to go all around the comet and across the strip of desert before he could reach the border with them. Unless he could go through the canyon, and there ain't no way through the canyon. The creek leads into the playa and just drops in the ground. But how about a hiding place? Joan demanded. He couldn't do it all in one night anyway. That's it. There's no hiding place, but what'd be in sight of the comet or the road in the daytime? Unless, said Stubby again, it's the canyon. And Miller sure ain't joining any game with Rip. Hardly. Joan considered. But if there is only the canyon trail. Stubby, don't try to tell me Mr. Miller was rustling. I'm not. Why should he? Yes, Stubby scratched his head helplessly. I'm only sure it wasn't Rip." "Do you think," asked Joan slowly, "that if we could convince Mr. Miller of all this, he could help us?" "He's the only one who can, but he's been so busy hounding Rip he hasn't thought of nothing else," said Stubby. "Anyway, he ain't crooked, don't need to be. He rode out into the canyon sometime later and carried the message from his employer, asking if Mr. Miller would be kind enough to visit the Double N. Mr. Miller would, with singular pleasure. When he got back, Stubby scratched his head and sat down beside Sam Long, who was mending slowly. "You know, Sam, I never figured it before till I got out there. Who in hell's working that mine of Miller's? Ever see any of his employees in town?" "Gosh, no," Long sat up. "Only Landers and a couple of hands like that. They ain't digging the mines. Remember, the thing wasn't worked for 15 years before he took it over, just on account of labor." Stubby rolled a cigarette. "Maybe we can find out tonight," he grunted. "I ain't much on headwork, Sam. I sure wish we had Rip here, and him free to investigate. I got a hunch that this mine business may be something to start on." Long shook his head. "Not so much, Stubby. The gold's straight enough, lots of it, all stamped in bars and assayed proper. But wov's digging it. It might be Indians, and you'd have to live in the mountains, or else get out through the other end of the canyon, if there is another end." "If there is," mused Stubby, "that just throws another joker in the deck." He sighed. "Oh well, I took on 2 new hands today. I need rest, and puzzles always wear me plumb out." Chapter 15. Miller had made his appearance shortly after dusk, but when he learned the nature of the discussion to which he had been summoned, he seemed chagrined. Chagrined, too, that Sam Long and Stubby stayed very much in evidence in the big living room where Joan received him. "Them cattle didn't go through my trail," he said flatly. "Why, my house squats square across it, and the mines are beyond. And I suppose if they got past the house, the men in the mines be in the way, huh?" Stubby murmured. Miller shot him a sharp look. "Of course. And wov's workin' them mines, come to think of it," drawled Stubby without looking at their guest. "Gosh, Miller, they must be ghosts. Must take a sight of men to keep on turning out that ore." Miller laughed uncomfortably. Joan frowned. "It does," he agreed. "We get all kinds. Most of them from below the line. They drift in looking for work. We've got good quarters for them, so they stay pretty close till you've saved a little, and then drift out." He turned quickly to Joan. "I don't know why you refuse to believe Rip's guilty," he said. "Personally, it doesn't matter. He's away now, and if he ever comes back, he's cooked." Joan flushed. "I'd like to get at the truth, that's all," she said. Rip's condemned in advance, and mostly on account of losses we've suffered." Miller laughed, in what was meant to be a good-humored way. "Sentiment," he said. "Ladies on the range. Miss Walters, you better let me take over this property. I'll run it for you, if you like. But it's a man's job." Joan shook her head and was about to reply when hoofbeats were heard, and a horse slid to a stop before the veranda steps. Everyone looked up. Stubby got to his feet. At the sight of a cowboy outside the screen door, he looked relieved. "Come on in, Rissack." Turning to Long, he explained. "One of the new boys I just took on. What's up now?" The young puncher seemed embarrassed at facing so many people unexpectedly. "Maybe I shouldn't come," he said. "I'm not onto the job yet, but you didn't tell me you had cows ready for a drive up at the fork end of the valley, and I found about 50 of them bunched in a draw there. I just thought." Stubby leaned across the table. "Double N cows up there, 50?" he spat out. "How long since you seen them, Rissack?" There was a dead silence in the room. Stubby's quick reaction had told all of them enough. Joan leaned forward and Miller's eyes were upon her face. Sam Long shot the mine owner a quick look, and his eyes narrowed. He clutched painfully at his wounded shoulder and tried to move the healing leg wound in bandages. "I come straight from the draw," Rustler was saying. "Must it taken me about an hour and a half across the sand there. I started about as it was getting dark. Just happened to run into them and look the brand over out of curiosity." Stubby swung on his employer. "Bunched for a drive is right," he cried. "Them cows wasn't there yesterday, 'cause I rode through there. They've been cut out, and they'll be run off tonight." Joan sprang to her feet, her eyes blazing. "Come on, Stubby," she exclaimed. "This time, we may get there in time to find out things. Saddle my horse." Miller sprang up, but Stubby cut him off. "Not you, Miss Joan. You can't ride out on this." "It's insane," Miller exploded. "Look here, Miss Walters. You stay, and I'll ride along with Stubby. That'll make 3 of us, and—" Long said nothing. Lying back in his comfortable chair, his eyes flickered from his employer's face to Miller's. "I'm going," said Joan. There was decision in her voice. "I'm going with Stubby and Rustler, Mr. Miller. If you think you can help, I'd be glad to have you come along." Stubby groaned. "It's no use, Rustler," he said, turning. "Saddle them horses. I'll get a couple of rifles." Sam Long had not moved when they all went out a few minutes later. He listened intently to the departing hoofbeats of the 4 mounts, and his black brows were drawn down in deep thought. He commenced inspecting his bandages. The moon had not yet risen. Unspeaking, the 4 pressed across the rolling lands toward the strip of desert which cut off the direct line toward the draw to which Rustler was leading the way. Joan found Miller riding slightly to her rear and alongside. "I wish you'd let me take you back, Miss Walters," she heard him say. "This isn't a woman's work." She did not reply. Her lips were set, and under a soft-colored sombrero her eyes were keen and determined. She carried a small silver-mounted and pearl-handled .38, the gift of her uncle, and there was an ornamented belt of cartridges at her waist. Stubby and Rustler rode ahead, unspeaking. They crossed the treacherous sand, which caught at the hoofs of the straining mounts and plunged into an arroyo. The shadows of the mountains loomed far southward, the foothills converging upon one another. A few bleak stars stood out in the purple sky. The 2 cowmen held Winchesters across their saddles, and their holsters hung low. They rode straight up, effortless, until Rustler put up a warning hand. They halted. Ahead, in the bulking darkness, there was movement. Stubby knew the draw to be not far. They could hear cattle. Stubby swore. Leather cracked. "You're moving through the draw," Stubby cried. "This time we got them. Come on." He dug in his spurs. "Miss Walters," began Miller, but she was already at Stubby's heels. She heard Miller getting off to a tardy start behind her. Through mesquite and sage, they pounded to the crest of a low ridge. Dust was seeping up gray through the sparse trees and thorny cactus. The sound of hundreds of moving hoofs at a gallop grew into a tumult. Stubby crested the ridge and uttered a Sioux whoop. Then suddenly, the tumult became chaos. Joan was conscious of pistol shots, cries of warning. She drew her gun, just as Stubby brought up his rifle and fired. She saw the red flame from his weapon stab the dark, heard Rustler curse and saw him slide sidewise. Then a yell of warning, "Landers!" Whirling in tense surprise, she saw Miller's gun bark again, and knew suddenly that it had been he who brought Rustler down. Again it flamed. Stubby's gun flew from his hands, and he slid backward. His horse leapt, and Stubby dropped to the ground. Like a flash, comprehension came. Joan saw 2 men emerging from the draw and bearing down upon her. She brought up the .38 and suddenly found her wrists caught. Iron arms clasped her hands together and held the muzzle pointed to the sky. In her ear, she heard Miller's voice. "Take that pop gun out of her hand, Landers." "What?" She felt the gun twisted free and heard Miller's laugh. Almost, she mixed up the party. Wouldn't stay at home. He released her hands, but caught her bridle. "Well, you can't go back to the double end now. Reckon you're going to spend a little vacation in the canyon and learn to take advice." Joan was conscious of his shining, avid eyes, of the grinning, stubble-bearded faces that loomed out of the dark, their vicious, cruel laughter. "She knows too much now, she's gotta come," grinned the man called Landers. "Well, Chief, you didn't think your courtship was gonna end like this." There was a chuckle. "Take care of her," Miller ordered. "One of you boys, go back and finish off Sam Long. If he starts talking, you'll commence to wonder. I don't think that Chinese cook knew I was on the ranch, but if he gets in the way, make it a clean out. Let's get going." Chapter 16. They ran swiftly through El Latigazo's camp, putting an end to the restlessness that had characterized the outlaws during the past days. It also isolated the three newcomers with the exception of Gruman, who grew more silent and uncommunicative and who gambled incessantly, either at the Cantina in La Victoria or at the camp. Most of the money from the previous operations of the band had been gambled and drunk away. When the news came, the last of it disappeared. On that last day, when Perez awaited only Miller's messenger with final orders, there was a tense quiet. Rip had remained in his tent. He did not want to seem curious. Though El Latigazo had accepted him, he was fully aware that he and Maclin were still under suspicion. Before a little window, cut into the mess shack wall, and used as a sort of commissary window for the sale of tobacco, whiskey, and other things, two Chinamen had halted. Rip saw the cook's head emerge. He talked with one of the Mexicans who had come up with the nervous-looking, uncertain yellow men. There was no one else in sight. The camp was quiet. Rip, watching the scene at the cook shack and studying the people thoughtfully, scarcely heard Maclin, as the deputy, fumbling with tobacco papers, slipped about a corner of the tent and sat down on a stump. He followed his companion's eyes and nodded. "Yes, I've been watching them too. They use always been Chinese in this camp, Rip, but they always is along this part of the border. Today, though, I saw several in town, and they ain't been more than one here before." Rip met his eyes. "I was wondering," he murmured. "Do you suppose?" He jerked to his feet. "Hell, that's one solution. That shipment too. It's something going through the canyon from this side. Why not Chinese?" "Yes," Lou Maclin considered. "But where do they come out? And what happens when you're through, if that is the game? I've been figuring on that, too." "That remains for later," said Rip. "I'm sure, the more I think of it, that we're smuggling Chinese through." "And how about the cattle?" Rip brought up, scowling. Every new clue they got seemed to render the situation as a whole the more baffling. What had Chinese smuggling, a very profitable business as he knew, to do with Miller, who owned a valuable mine? And what had it to do with the widespread cattle raiding across the line? They saw Groomman dismounting from a horse, which he left outside the small corral, and come walking toward them. Since taking up his place with El Latigazo, Gruman had evidently borrowed money. He had become more of a dandy than ever. His soft boots shone incongruously in this setting. His dark silken shirts, his tailored breeches, and his new gray sombrero reflected an extravagant taste allowed full rein. He halted before Rip, smiling. "There's some news in. We go tonight, anyway. I'm leaving you. Have you made up your mind yet about your plans?" Rip met his gaze evenly. "I'd like to know yours first," he suggested. "Oh, I know you're going on to Miller. But I expect to find out things. Are you going to betray us?" "That depends. As I told you, I'm not going to let you do anything that'll harm me. Naturally. And I have nothing against either Miller or Perez, unless I find that their activities are responsible for my hard luck. But it looks as though I'll find out just that. What then? Gruman smiled. Our ways part, don't they? I've thrown in here. Once you're against them, you're against me. Suddenly he paused, his eyes softened. The mocking lines of his mouth relented. If you're thinking of my quitting and going straight, you can stop. There was once I would have tried, even though you'd get me sooner or later. But I would have tried. He smiled at Rip. You were there, he said softly. I antagonized her when all I wanted to do was to work for her. Rip's eyes narrowed. He drew a quick breath. For a moment, he stared at Groomman, unable to comprehend this sudden, unexpected glimpse of the man. And then Groomman laughed, and he was himself again. But that was once upon a time. Right now, all I can remember is that she was beautiful and desirable. And I can't make myself love you too much, because it's you she cares for. His eyes glittered coldly. Rip, if killing you'd win for me, your life wouldn't be worth a nickel. There was a dead silence. Maclin got slowly to his feet, wary and alert. Rip's fingers twitched. Gruman did not move. Then Rip shook his head. All right, we'll close the subject, he said, tight-lipped. There's no truce between us. If you get in my way, Gruman, you die. And if you mention Miss Walters again, you'll be advancing the date. Gruman shrugged carelessly and started to turn away. Just then, the three men whirled at a hail from between the buildings, and they saw El Latigazo striding toward them. We're ready, announced the chief in high good humor. You're starting in less than an hour, Jones. We divide into two parts, and the gentleman who met his fate with your guns usually handled the first. You will go ahead at dusk with 3 men and Gruman here. One of the men will know the way. You will clear the trail. Rip nodded impassively. El Latigazo turned upon Maclin. You come with me with the shipment. We have only a few men, but we must know all is clear. You, Senor Jones, will halt when you meet Senor Miller's men. They will have cattle. Senor Gruman will return with them, and when I come up, the rest of us will return here, unless there is trouble on the way. Rip nodded, considerably relieved. When he heard that he and Maclin were to be separated, a dozen wild plans instantly began to chase through his mind. That might ruin everything. But evidently, Lou could come up with the chief. And there were cattle, Chinamen going one way and cattle the other. It was all coming clear now. Gruman saw it too. Rip had a swift premonition. Gruman was going to speak. His body tensed. He met the other man's cold eyes and saw the flame in them. At that moment, Perez gave a little laugh. This is magnifico, danger and excitement again, and the greatest haul of all, and the gold tonight. Miller sends it down. He is in a good humor, and no surprise that he should be. I envy you, Senor Gruman. There is a lady at the camp now. Rip paled. It was fortunate that Perez was looking at Gruman. The latter stood rigid, unmoving, and slowly his smile came, a fixed, mirthless smile. Oh, woman. But who? The lady of the double N. I do not know the story, but I think it was a mistake. Anyway, she will stay, for she cannot go now with what she knows. Stay, with the rest of the secrets of the canyon. Caramba, if I had the cold blood of this Miller, I could be dictator of my country. Chapter 17. Rip was scarcely aware of the rest of the words. Cold, impassive as he was, inside he was writhing, and it was agony to have to listen to Perez's sneering talk in silence. Gruman never moved. He was tense as a statue, until the chief suddenly decided that he would take him off with him. "We will not delay, Senor Jones," he said. "He must be ready to start at once." He paused. "Jones, this is your first chance. I have seen you use guns. Remember that your task tonight is to clear the way. There is no failure in our company, any more than there is treachery." For a moment his dark eyes glittered over Rip's face. Then he turned away, and Gruman, without a sign to the other two, followed him. Maclin scarcely dared look at his friend. When he did, Rip was white to the lips. She's Miller's prisoner," he articulated hoarsely. "Did you hear him? With the rest of the secrets of the canyon." "God." Maclin gripped his arm. "Buck up, son. We'll get in there some way. You've got to keep straightened out while you're here, or we lose at the start. Don't tell me Latigazo ain't still a bit suspicious." "I know." Rip dug his nails into his palm. Suddenly, he swung on the deputy. "All right, Lou. We'll get in. But we've got to get in before it's too late. If you see a break, never mind me. Get back to Bochera and get a posse through that canyon and to her." His fingers dug into Maclin's arm. "You promise me?" "Pardner," said the deputy slowly, "I'll let you rot in there if I see a way to get her clear." "Good." There was no more. Rip went about the simple job of rolling his blankets and stuffing his saddlebags. He twirled the cylinders of his guns reflectively and looked up a moment later as Groomman came in. Groomman was expressionless. The bitterness had gone from his eyes. They were alive, fierce. I couldn't have known of this, Rip. He just told me." "What was it?" "I don't know much. I didn't want to appear too curious. But it looks as though Miller was at the ranch last night when his men were moving double-end cattle, and Miss Walters rode out with her men after them. Miller went along, killed her foreman, sent another man back for the wounded man at the house, and kidnapped her so she wouldn't tell what she had seen." There was a moment of silence. Maclin was looking at the outlaw. "Well, Gruman," he said at length, "what are you going to do?" Gruman whirled, his eyes blazing. "Do? I'll kill that swine, kill him with my own hands, and take her home." "And that'll do a lot of good," Rip cut in impatiently. "You'll be murdered in there yourself. You've got to work with us." Gruman's eyes narrowed. His old antagonism returned. "And let you be the galloping hero, eh? God, man, haven't I told you I love her?" "What the devil does the hero part matter?" Rip cursed. "She's got to be rescued, tonight. You're going ahead, along. We've got to stay behind. You must leave marks so we'll know the trail through that canyon, and have some signal to tell us when to come up." Gruman stared sullenly. It was plain that his arrogant brain had leapt forward to wild hopes of dashing off with Joan Walters across his saddle. He saw a chance whereby she might be his, if only for a moment. To his mind, such a moment was worth life itself. Selfish, arrogant, life or death mattered little to him compared with his desires. "It's the only way," Maclin put in. Gruman bit his lip. "What's your suggestion?" "Leave chalk marks. There'll be a moon by the time we get in there. That trail's well hidden, unless a man knows the way. Get to the house. Then we'll follow, as soon as we can get away from Perez, and wait. When the best moment comes, fire 3 shots in quick succession, and Lou and I will come." He hesitated. "Then all right," he agreed sullenly. "I'll leave the marks. If you lose them, it's your affair. And if you don't come quickly enough when I'm ready, I shan't wait." He turned to the door. "That's all." Rip watched him swing away. "I can't trust him, Lou," he said. "He wants her for himself. Her danger is only an opportunity for his courage. And God knows he's got the courage." Maclin nodded. "But he may play square here. We'll see how it looks." He loves her, you know, Rip, in that wild, crazy way of his. But Rip saw little of comfort in the situation. A short time later, one of the mestizos came and told him the men were ready to start. Rip flung saddlebags and blanket roll over his shoulder and held out his hand to Maclin. "We'll meet up inside there," he said, "unless something goes wrong. If it does, count on me, Rip. Here's luck." Rip went out. Saddling took but a moment. A man named Rachiga was assigned as guide. There were two other men, one a half-breed and the other a renegade American, beside Gruman. "We will meet you at moonrise," promised Perez as they started. Rip nodded without expression. They passed between the quiet huts, and on the way out, circled around some 25 Chinamen, huddled fearfully together in a little crevice of land behind El Latigazo's shack. These watched their progress with wondering, querulous eyes. Rip felt tensely sorry for them. He looked at Groomman, who was riding at his side. "Groomman, I don't envy you," he said, low-voiced. "Look at those poor devils." The outlaw drew down one eyebrow and obeyed with a supercilious stare. "You don't call them human, surely?" "Pawns, Rip, just as we are. A man's got very little to do with what happens to his life, and all he can do to attend to it." They entered the canyon. It was by a trail that Rip had discovered several days before. Only at that time, he had run into what looked like a blank wall where a small spring emerged from the rocks in a clump of willows. Now, at Rachiga's grunted orders, they dismounted, went through the willows, and leading their mounts, scrambled up a steep face of rock to come out in a rock gully beyond. There was no sign to mark the gully as a trail, but trail it was. Rip mounted again thoughtfully. If Gruman played him false, he was beginning to see how impossible it would be to penetrate this place without a guide. Chapter 18. The moon had not yet arisen. Rip's band was proceeding cautiously. There were other men in these mountains, beside themselves and Miller's crowd. Outlaws lived here, and some Indians. There were men, too, in Mexico who knew their dealings. Was there not danger of attack? El Latigazo would never have bothered to send on these men ahead, Rip knew. Yet this consideration bore little weight. They moved along single file, while the rocks on either side sloped to a V where their ponies set their feet. Rip came last, behind Gruman. Behind them, by now, El Latigazo would have started with his shipment of Chinamen. Rip wondered casually again what happened to the yellow men on the farther side, and why Miller was in this game. Ahead were Miller's men, moving through the silent gorges along unmapped trails with another contraband shipment, stolen cattle from Mexico. And beyond, in the heart of the canyon of gold and secrets, was Joan, in the power of the scoundrel whose brain lay behind this traffic in souls and treachery. Yet Rip steeled himself. There was work to be done, little time for dwelling on sentiment or fear. Beside Gruman, whom he could not trust, there were 3 men with him. When El Latigazo came up with Lou Maclin, there would be 3 or 4 men more. The Chinamen were not to be counted in, unless fear and ignorance made them run wild. Gruman was an undecipherable quantity. He might go either way. And there were Miller's men. Not many perhaps, but enough to run those cattle through. Rip shook his head. It was impossible to consider a showdown at the meeting place. The first thing to do was to let the 2 forces split. Let Gruman go on. In some way, later, he and Lou had to win free and come back on Gruman's heels. When the path widened a trifle, he spurred up by the other's side. "I'm wondering how far we can count on you, Gruman," he whispered. "For the sake of Miss Walters." Gruman never looked up. His eyes were on the back of the Mexican riding ahead of him. 3 shots in quick succession, he said grimly. "Maybe you'll be there. I don't see how you'll get through. That's all." I'll fire the shots when it's time for you to come." It was all he would say. Rip dropped back in baffled silence. They rode on. Presently, Rachiga held up his hand. They were approaching what looked to be a pass. Beyond it, there was only darkness, where the towering bulk of the Sierras del Badia brooded over these serried foothills. They closed up. The opening in the rocks was reached just as the edge of a crescent moon began to climb out of the darkness. The movement of many bodies came from a level that was below the little party. Rachiga pointed, as they got to the notch in the rocks, at a wide space formed by bulging shoulders of limestone formation, centered about a smooth barren rock flooring. Out of this rose a man's figure, a rifle etched sharply as he held it across his crooked elbow, and from behind him a dust and a subdued lowing came, and the clatter of many hoofs shod and unshod. "This is the place," said Rachiga. "They come now." Rip and his men rode into the open space, and dismounted just as the first of the string of cows came through the dark gap. The moon was rising. The cattle came at a run, pouring through with bellowing and grunting. One vaquero rode near the head of the column. There must be others in the rear. "Go through," Rachiga shouted above the confusion to the man in the lead. "The way is clear." Presently, 2 more vaqueros came, that was all. As Rip watched, the herd milled at the notch where he had just entered, and then slowly filtered through. The men stayed. It was then that Rip understood. There was no need for herding them further. They must keep on, in the narrow defile between the rocks, until El Latigazo's men received them when they emerged. Rip's eyes lighted. That would mean that most of the outlaw band would be stationed at the Mexican end of the canyon trail to care for the rustled cattle. El Latigazo would need only a few for the task of herding along the obedient and docile Chinaman. And then came another thought. Suppose Maclin had been left at the other end. He scarcely heard when Miller's man came up and was introduced. Another American this was, leading the 2 Mexicans who had helped herd the cattle. He scarcely even thought of Gruman until there came a shout from down the trail. He sprang to his feet. A moment later, with a whoop and yells, El Latigazo and his men drove a frightened, stumbling mass of yellow men through the notch, exactly as Miller's men had sent the steers in the opposite direction. The outlaws were in fine fettle. El Latigazo had only 3 men with him, and one of them was Lou Maclin. As Rip sighed with relief, Groomman shot him a sharp glance. He turned. "Working from here, Groomman," he whispered. "There'll be no other chance to talk. Do your job." There was no answer. Rip saw bottles being passed around. Perez's men had brought them. There was shouting, laughter, cursing. The Chinamen huddled, fearful and tremulous in one corner of the rocky enclosure. Rip stood aside and found that Maclin was at his elbow. "Only those 2 and Perez," he said, pointing to the men. "And the 2 you brought with you. Together, if we work it right, we might be able to handle them, if we can take our time and count on Gruman." Rip shook his head. A tiny fire had been lighted, and across from him, above the circle of sweating, flame-painted savage faces, he saw the foreigner's profile. It was a handsome profile, cold and proud, yet in the eyes the flame started a strange light. Rip shook his head. "We can't trust Gruman," he said distinctly. "We've got to take our chances and get back on his heels. He'll never leave a trail." Maclin shrugged. "All right. Give the signal when you're ready." He moved away carelessly. Rip, his eyes following Gruman, outwardly cool and yet inwardly fearful of what was to come, circled the flames and joined the chief of the band. Chapter 19. She sat on the patio, in which she had been sitting since early evening. She had been conscious of a hum of activity about Miller's quarters all day, a subdued something that betokened the unusual. She remembered little of the night before. It had been long and unending, bitter and harsh. Miller's mocking gallantry had only rendered the pain of her captivity the more acute. The shock of sudden discovery, the swift realization, in the space of a few pistol shots, of all that had taken place, numbed her faculties for hours. Stubby shot down like a dog. The cowboy Rasak dropped in his saddle, both from behind. Sam Long was probably finished by now. And she was a captive. Tears came to Joan's eyes, unwilling tears that fear or pain could never have wrung, when she realized that somewhere out in the dark Rip wandered, haunted by men, exiled, because of the machinations of this fiend who now owned her. It had been horrible. Swift though realization had been, it was many hours before Joan's numbed brain awakened, and the whole thing became chiseled clear. But full understanding had not yet come. It came after the dinner in the patio, a dinner at which Miller and Landers sat drinking bottle after bottle of rich wine when the food was taken away, their leering, jeering compliments growing more crude and impossible momentarily. She gathered that there was occasion for celebration, that she was not the only occasion. She noticed that there were no Mexicans about, or Indians. If there were other American employees, they had gone sometime during the afternoon. There were only soft-footed Chinamen, fearful and cringing at every word from the two white men, Chinamen everywhere. Miller's house was built of 3 wings, enclosing a lovely patio, in which palms and Spanish bayonet screened the front from a sharp declivity which gave into the mines. The entrance from the canyon trail through which they had come was on the opposite side, in the center of the main building. Tall windows opened on the patio from indoors. The table had been set for 4. "We expect a guest, a business partner," Miller had told Joan when he ordered her to attend the meal. "We're not going to wait for him. He may be late." Then his mockery vanished, and she saw the hard light in his colorless eyes. "So long as you behave, you won't complain of your treatment. But this isn't the double N in this canyon. My word is law." But Joan had not tried to disobey. All that day, he had allowed her to keep to a well-furnished room he had assigned to her. A mute Chinaman had squatted outside her door. Joan had been able to see, in the far distance, the winding of the beautiful canyon trail with its flushes of alternating yellows and mauve and crimson, until they faded into evening. She had scarcely tasted her food. There were shadows under her deep eyes. She was silent. While Miller drank, he leaned nearer and nearer to where she sat at his right side of the table under the stars. Occasionally, there was a breeze that came through the trees bordering the patio, and at such moments a sensation of fear and horror crept upon the girl. For borne upon the breeze was an odor, half human and half of decay, and sometimes she thought she could hear sounds like far-off moans of helpless agony. When she looked up, startled, Miller would laugh and Landers would join him. "You'll learn a lot about this canyon before you leave here," the master said. "Maybe you'll like it, too. Anyhow, there's gold and there's luxury and power. And maybe, someday there will be a small empire." He was very close. His drinking had tainted his breath, and his avid eyes were repulsive. His face was more heavy, gross. She shrank backward, conscious of Landers's thoughtful, waiting eyes. Miller laughed, and caught her arm in his huge hand. "Not yet, eh? Well, there's years, my dear girl. Years. Unless I get tired of trying to break you." Another Chinaman came in, bowing, and spoke to Miller. Joan closed her eyes. Was it only yesterday that she lived on the double N and wondered what had become of Rip Rip? Only last week that she had admitted to herself, in happy surrender, that she wanted to hear him speak, as she knew he must speak soon. This was a different world. Miller's power made itself felt all about her. The abrupt transition from her former safety to her present, dispelled any doubts she might have had of the man's insidious mastery. "Bring him in right away," she heard Miller shout, and she opened her eyes. He was standing, somewhat unsteadily, gripping the table. Joan looked toward the door opening, and her breath stopped. Standing there was the slender, debonair figure of the man who had applied to the Double N for a job, Joseph Gruman. He scarcely glanced at her, yet she thought there was a kind of message in his eyes. Landers watched him carefully. He came forward and took Miller's hand. "So you're Gruman. Glad to welcome you. There ain't many of us here, and we pick our employees. But there's everything worth having right here." Landers stood up. "That is, if you ain't too particular," he added coldly. "I'm here." Gruman met his hostile eyes. "If I'm not wanted, I'll go." Miller laughed. "Nobody leaves here till we all leave at once," he exclaimed. "Never mind that. You'll stay. I know all about you. Now, did you bring the shipment?" "It's here. I came with your men." "Bueno," Miller waved toward Joan. "This is our new hostess," he grinned. "Miss Joan, this is Captain Gruman, late of the Austrian army." She saw Gruman's eyes flash with a dull anger. She met his look. He gave a stiff, formal little bow. "I've met Captain Gruman," she said icily, "when he was posing as an honest man." Miller stared. Landers looked suspiciously at the new recruit. But Gruman did not even smile. "The lady is right," he said, "except that at the time I was not posing. Any more," he added, "than I am posing now." Chapter 20. The atmosphere during the dinner, which Gruman ate alone, in spite of Miller's wine-induced gaiety, was oppressive. The newcomer scarcely looked at Joan. Landers kept his suspicious eyes fastened on the new recruit, except for an occasional sharp glance at the girl. Gruman scarcely touched the wine. "When you're finished," said Miller, "we'll go out and look over the shipment. All in good condition?" "Apparently," Gruman said. He looked up. "I can't help wondering how you get them out of here," he said. Landers gave a snort. Miller laughed boastfully. "Gruman, those hombres ain't never going out of this canyon. We send a few, when we got too many and need the cash. The rest, I use personal. How in hell do you think we work those mines?" Gruman started. Even his cold-blooded contempt for human life was stirred. He knew of Miller's mines. He had guessed, from the conversation of Maclin and Rip, that there was a secret connection with them. But these mines were idle for a good many years, Miller went on. Indian labor got scarce. The gold was all there. It took me to find the solution. There's always Chinese who'll pay to be smuggled over here. And nobody knows where they go. We take what they offer, and well, we've put them across the line, ain't we? They might just as well stay here as anywhere." He quaffed deeply from his goblet. "Hope the new ones are healthy," he grunted. 5 of them died last week." Gruman was staring at him. Slowly, the meaning of the words came to Joan. Horror overspread her features, horror she made no attempt to conceal. At sight of it, Landers laughed. "When they died, it was the first time they'd seen daylight in 2 years," he said. "Gotta keep them locked up in there. We ain't got many men to handle them, in case they get feelin' frisky." Still, Gruman said nothing. Miller got up. "Come on. Let's look them over. We can come back later." Landers followed him. Gruman picked up his coffee cup and pretended to be finishing it. As he half rose with the cup to his lips, he whispered across the table, "I've just left Rip. Be ready to make a break with me any second tonight." He saw her startled, disbelieving eyes. "Believe me or not," he added, "isn't anything better than this. Miller's drunk." He gave her no chance to reply. Turning, he joined Miller and the suspicious segundo at the door. Joan watched them go. For a long time she sat in dull silence. But the question was simple enough, and there was no argument. As Gruman had said, anything was better than this. Anything. She shuddered, as though with the cold as she sat there. This was a canyon of slaves, and Miller was master. His cold-blooded cruelty and ruthlessness gave her a feeling of utter helplessness. Those Chinamen, that half-human, half-decayed stench that came from the mine's mouth on the breeze. Groomman sensed it, as they rounded the clump of palms and made for the shadowy outlines of the gulch beyond. The canyon walls below them were painted silvery blue in the moonlight, and a long basin. A sort of ridge, there were numerous black holes cut into the rock face, round, worn holes that at that distance looked like the abodes of cliff-dwellers. He saw, however, that the trail from all these holes converged upon one spot, a shallow and wide hole below them. There was but one exit from this natural basin, and that was where two jagged rocks made a notch. Here, the shining metal of a Hotchkiss gun loomed up grimly, and Gruman needed to know no more. The shipment of slave workers was being forced through the notch, and into a kind of wail came from the black holes. Gruman thought he could distinguish shaven heads peering out. It was horrible, sickening. Ruthless a man as he was himself, it turned his stomach. He thought of Rip, and of the girl in the power of this beast beside him. He wished for the first time that he had kept his word, and left the markings for Rip along the trail. "All here," Miller said, as the last of the stumbling, uncomprehending yellow men found his way through the notch. "Let's go back and finish up the wine. Gruman, what do you think of the new hostess?" "It's an unexpected pleasure," said Gruman. "Suppose you and Landers finish the wine. I've been going hard all day, and I'd like to sleep." "Fair enough. Some valley to get into, ain't it? Easier to get in, though, than it is to get out," Miller chuckled. Joan had disappeared when the three men entered. Gruman went to a room on the second floor at once. He knew he had to work fast, and was gratified to find that the patio roof ran underneath his window. As he slipped outside, gun at his hip and another inside his shirt, he could hear Miller's voice in the patio below. "The hostess ought to be with host when he's drinkin'," he heard in thick accents. "Landers, she ought to be here. I'm gonna." "Take it easy, Chief," came Landers's voice. "Give her time. Wait till she realizes that you're boss here and there's no way out." Miller seemed to subside, but grudgingly. "All the same," he grumbled. "Yes," said Gruman between his teeth, "there's damn little time." It was scarcely 15 minutes later that, fumbling along the windows opening on the patio roof, he reached the room occupied by the girl. He was ignorant of its location, but he knew that Miller and Landers were still below. "Go and bring her down, and be damned to you, Landers." He touched a windowsill. "Miss Walters?" From ahead came the whispered answer. "Here." He reached the next window. Her white face peered out at him. "He's coming up," Gruman cried. "We've got to be quick." "But what can we do?" "I'm not sure. But I've got 2 horses, and I've twisted wires around the gates of the corral. They won't open in a hurry anyway. The best we can do is run for it." "Know the way through?" "Yes, but the pass is guarded. And I have a gun. Come on." His blazing, fearless eyes gave her confidence. They could hear Miller's cursing voice on the stairs. Joan slipped through the window, and for a moment they crouched on the slanting, narrow roof. Then, Gruman leading, they felt their way along toward the farther end. Just as they reached it, there came a yell, a wild cry of rage, a curse. Gruman said nothing. His hands gripped the roof edge, and he swung himself over. He dropped. "Have to take your chances," he called up. "It's only a short drop." But Joan hesitated no longer. In a moment, she fell into his arms and straightened. Running feet pounded through the patio. Uproar commenced. Inside the house, there was confusion and a medley of curses. "Here they are, Chief," Landers rounded the patio. Shoving Joan toward where two saddled mounts bulked among the trees, Gruman crouched, and his two guns spoke just as Landers fired. The segundo swore and ducked for cover. Whirling, Gruman broke into a run. He found his saddle in a single leap. Joan was turning her mount's head. A volley of shots clipped through the trees, and then Gruman dug in his spurs. 3-minute start, he gasped. "Let's go." Chapter 21. Gruman departed with reluctance. The former was certain. Something in Gruman's glittering eyes had warned him that there would be no trail marked. It was with relief that they saw El Latigazo send on 2 of his men to assist in herding the cattle that had already been sent over the trail. Thus, it was a party of just 5 men that started over the route to El Latigazo's camp, and of these 5, 2 were Rip and Lou Maclin. They rode in silence. The Mexican, Rachiga, led the way as he had at first. The American, Ross, was next. After him, Lou Maclin rode, and Rip followed in the rear behind the leader. He was undecided. So far as he could see, there was nothing for it but straight battle, and the sounds of gunfire might be heard. But he had to get back. Get back soon enough to get on the trail of Gruman's crew before they should be too far ahead. The trail narrowed still more perceptibly before a point, which Rip remembered, where it took a sheer drop into a half-mile or so of wider space. Rip glanced at Lou Maclin's immobile back. Was Lou ready? Strangely enough, it was El Latigazo himself who solved the problem. Turning with a knowing smile, just before they entered the draw, he said, "I prefer to ride behind, Senor Jones. You will precede me here." Rip gave no sign. Nodding, he spurred up and waited, apparently, for Perez to take the slide. The others had gone on. For a moment, they were out of sight below. Suddenly, Rip leaned forward, swung from his saddle, just as the forefeet of Perez's horse started to slide downward. His forearm caught El Latigazo's throat, and the bandit was jerked backward. A startled cry came from his lips. "Lou, now." "Right." Rip's gun came down across Perez's temple, and the sight notch started the blood as it struck. The cry died on Perez's lips, and he dropped inert. Springing free, as the riderless horse slid wildly down the incline, Rip's 2 guns covered the men below. Maclin already had his .45 out. "Stick them up, you hombres," he rapped out. There was a curse. Rachiga, half hidden from Maclin, whirled and brought out his gun. Rip's 2 weapons spoke as one, and the Mexican was down before he had pulled a trigger. Maclin's weapons spoke, and Ross slumped forward in his saddle, a single 6-gun clattering to the rock flooring. Rip was coolly reloading as Maclin turned. "Neat work, Lou." But there was some sort of a trap ahead. "Perez suspected us. He just told me to ride ahead of him, and that's all he'll remember for a while. He's asleep." "Yes, I had a hunch we were due for a trap before we got back." Maclin was cool. They spent little time on El Latigazo. At any moment, men might come along, attracted by the shots. But they trussed him securely and stuffed a thick gag between his teeth. Then Rip leapt into his saddle. "Come on, Lou. We've got to travel from here on." They galloped off. The trail beyond the bowl, where they had met the men from Miller's mine, was clear for a good distance. It enabled them to close up the space that separated them from the slower-moving body of men ahead. Rip's face was grim. "Not a sign of a trail," he pointed out. "I knew Groomman'd double-cross us." Maclin only nodded. In half an hour they had picked up sight of their men far ahead of them, and cautiously they hung well in the rear. Through a succession of tortuous, winding defiles, the procession wended its way. Occasionally, a snatch of song drifted back to Rip. But not often. The moon was high overhead and bright when the end of the trail was sighted. Rip and Maclin rode out of a screened valley and saw a lone Joshua tree on the rise ahead. They moved on slowly. Voices were borne to them. "Steady," warned Maclin. "Look, there's a kind of ridge up there behind them palmettos. Maybe we can see what lays ahead from there. This must be the camp." Rip nodded. Dismounting, they wormed their way over treacherous shale, through a tangle of mesquite that grew against the face of the sloping rock, and reached a thin ledge. From here, after they had passed the growth, they could lie flat and enjoy a complete view of Miller's Canyon retreat. A little below them, the Chinamen were being herded toward the bowl of rock. Rip saw two of the riders ride off carelessly and dismount before a corral, letting down the bars. He saw Gruman, coolly confident, swing around the edge of the house where palms screened the patio, and disappear. Maclin swore aloud. From their position opposite, they were able to see partially inside the gloomy holes cut in the rock face. "Smell that," Maclin gasped. "Man, Rip, my God, do you savvy what it means now? They keep them there. Chinese. But keep them is right. Remember wonderin' about those mines. The Chinese think they're being smuggled across the border, and this is as far as they ever get. It's a slave mine, Rip, and that's how Miller gets his gold." But the cattle," Rip's eyes suddenly lit with comprehension as his thoughts raced beyond a stunned realization of what he saw. "I've got it. He wants my ranch, mine and the double N. They completely surround the entrance to the canyon on the American side. And he wouldn't have to be afraid of people visiting him and seeing this. He could make his headquarters on the Square D and cover his place completely." Maclin nodded. "That's it, Rip," he said gravely. "Worse than a rustler, even a double-crossin' one, worse than a Chinese smuggler. A slaver." There was a moment of awed silence. Both men had the same thought. It was Rip who breathed it, and Joan's in his hands. "Not for long, son." Maclin gripped his friend's arm encouragingly as they lay there. "Not for long. Let's camp here till they're asleep. Let's see, there were 3 men came with the cows. That's an Americano over on that machine gun where the Chinese went through. Miller and Landers, and maybe 1 or 2 more. But we're good for a surprise attack. Let's wait till the moon goes and see what happens." Chapter 22. Yanez could not have guessed that his erstwhile companions were within sight of Miller's rendezvous. Had he known, when he rode off with Joan, and heard the first excited stir of pursuit behind him, he would gladly have called upon them. In that moment, the man was thinking only of the girl at his side, her sweetness and allure, and his one reckless wish was to get her out of Arlen Miller's clutches. But in the first bolt, they had the advantage. The cool rush of the night, wind against his face, the stretching black under him, the ribboning trail pallid under the waning moon, these things and the presence of the girl at his side restored to Groomman all of his old arrogance and power. The pursuit appeared to be slow in starting. There might be a picket ahead, even 2. But these were nothing. Groomman had never known fear. The presence of ordinary danger only added zest now. Smiling, he glanced at Joan. Her face was set. Gravely she turned to look at him. Then, at some quality in his smile, the light in his eyes, her own eyes narrowed swiftly in apprehension, and she looked quickly away. "Don't worry," he said reassuringly. "We'll make it. We can outrun these fellows." And ahead, he broke off sharply, and instinctively he pulled in a little at his bridle. The trail, winding upward in long curves, almost completely revealed in the moonlight, was no longer empty. 2 men, rifles part of their profiles against the gray rocks behind them, debouched from a clump of mesquite and pinyon and stood in the road. Far above, where Joan knew the canyon debouched into the open of the mesa, another picket stood outlined against the sky. "They've got rifles," she cried. "And the road's all open." "There isn't a chance." For an instant, his bold eyes flamed with eagerness, the zest of danger. He seemed about to court certain death by riding directly for the two men who, with their rifles, could pick him off without trouble before he got within pistol range. At the point in the trail at which they were, they could even take cover and wait for him to come up. Thus he would be trapped. Near at hand, though, there was an alternative. A hump of ground rose at the right. Beyond it, though the slopes rose again, Joan was aware that the eastern foothills of the Sierras went eventually downward. The ground was less level, and there might be a hiding place. "Over there," she cried and pointed. "It's the only way." Gruman reined in. His eyes blazed. His face was distorted with anger. "Hurry," commanded the girl. "If we don't take that way, we're trapped." He nodded. "Come on." Over the steep ridge, they forced their mounts. Then down a sliding face of shale into a ravine. It was dark here. Behind them, 2 shots of warning rang out sharply. Groomman took the lead, cursing himself vainly. The moon was waning rapidly now. They plunged in almost complete darkness through the interminable length of the ravine in which they found themselves. Going was difficult and slow, and before long they heard confused cries from somewhere in the rear. The ravine came suddenly to an end. Gruman pulled up instinctively, rising in his stirrups. Immediately at their feet, another steep descent began. There appeared to be water at the bottom, a shallow stream and narrow, and beyond for 3 or 4 miles, hemmed in between mountainous ridges, was open country. "We'll take it," Gruman said grimly. "There's no other way." "Game?" Joan nodded. "Go ahead," she said. Gruman put his horse to the long bank. The animal balked, but then obeyed. In a moment, both steeds were sliding and stumbling down the incline. They brought up at the bottom without mishap, and found the stream easily fordable. Just then, a shot barked out. There was a jet of flame from the summit they had just left. Without comment, Gruman spurred his animal, and they went into the water. Scrambling up the farther side, the 2 fugitives raced up the incline, while behind them, 2 more mounts were beginning the long slide down to the bottom. One rider was spilled. But another came, and the first went tumbling down after his horse. "Look!" Joan exclaimed. "Is that a cabin?" It was on a sort of promontory, facing sheer open space, and behind it was a rock wall. Gruman's mount was laboring. He nodded, glancing behind him. "Isn't pursuit catching up?" The first 2 men were out of sight momentarily at the bottom of the slope. A third was running afoot after his horse. At the top of the opposite hill, 2 more mounted men were commencing the descent. A bullet pinged by, close. Another kicked up the dust in front of Joan's horse. "We've got to take shelter there," Gruman said slowly. Then his eyes blazed. "Maybe help will come. If it doesn't, we're finished." Joan looked away. Her first fear and revulsion for this man swept over her. But there was no alternative. The moon was almost below the horizon. When Gruman pulled over his mount's head and made for the shack, Joan followed. In the rear, Miller's riders were spurring fast, belaboring their mounts, yelling wildly, and firing rifles from the saddle. Gruman drew his gun when they reached the tiny cabin. But it was vacant. Empty and forlorn it looked, forgotten. A lonesome door banged to and fro with a faint breeze, in ghostly cadence. They entered unspeaking. But the single room of the interior, rude and dusty, told no story of its one-time occupants. Perhaps the low-roofed structure had been an Indian's home, an Indian who had camped too near to Miller's mine. There was not even a table. Across two boxes, long boards were stretched, and there was aged straw thrown across them. That was all. Joan found her lips trembling. The 2 long nights and the day just past had worn her down. The flight and the escape had been hazardous enough, but now the knowledge that they could go no further, that this lonesome barren spot saw the end of everything, was the last straw. Gruman slammed shut the door and turned to her. He must have sensed her emotion. After a moment of hesitancy, he stepped close and caught her hands. "You're not afraid," he exclaimed. "You're too game and too wonderful. Something'll happen." His voice trailed off. He went to the tiny, panelless window and stared off down the slope. Joan saw his profile, watched it. Something inside her compelled the words, "If it doesn't?" He whirled. Behind him, she caught a glimpse of a rider against the skyline. Gruman's face was desperate. Even in the dark, his eyes were aflame. "If it doesn't, I couldn't ask for a better finish," he said tensely. "Good God, do you think dying could mean anything to me when I was willing to face capture and death just to be near you? A glorious finish. I've never asked for more of life than that, and there's none more glorious than with you." Joan's first revulsion was gone. She sensed that this man was half mad, in his flaming passion, his contempt equally for life or death of men. It was no longer revulsion. She felt a deathly, gripping fear such as she had never known. From down the slope there was a voice of command, and before either of the 2 fugitives could speak again, a rifle cracked, and a slug of lead thudded into the opposite wall. Chapter 23. Upon hearing the shots fired by Landers when Gruman and Joan made their getaway, Rip's first action had been to scramble to his feet. But Maclin pulled him down. "Steady, partner," he cried. "I don't know what in hell you think you'll do down there now, but it's best to wait." Rip hesitated, then nodded agreement. The shots might mean anything. Groomman might have got into trouble, and there was no reason for helping him. The 2 on the ledge had not seen the fugitives ride off, and there were no more shots. Then other men rode away. The watchers remained puzzled. As the moon commenced to wane, they could see little. But a certain quiet came over the hacienda. The Chinamen had been driven into their holes, and except for an occasional mournful wail from there was no sound. A lone sentry was in sight, slumped behind the Hotchkiss gun. Rip was fretting. "Must be about time now, Lou," he muttered. "Now or never. There aren't so many of them, and most must be asleep." He broke off suddenly. From up the valley, a rifle shot came. It was followed by a second. Rip got to his feet, his features grim. "We're starting now," he decided. "There's things happening in this canyon tonight." As Maclin joined him, he continued, "Drop down here and take the house. I'll get this hombre at the machine gun. If you meet Gruman, shoot to kill, but find Joan first. I'll be with you as soon as this fellow's taken care of." With only a nod, Lou Maclin slipped off into the dark. Rip went in the opposite direction. Silence fell again. Some 5 minutes later, the man at the machine gun sat up with a start. Over the edge of the rock against which he leaned, a .45 rested. From behind it came a cool voice, "Stay steady, amigo." "Don't move," the man's hands shot upward. He gave a gasp of fear and astonishment. Rip took scarcely 20 seconds to disarm him. He wore a single pistol, that was all. "Now get up and march," Rip ordered. "And be careful. We don't want to wake anybody, sabe? There's nobody. Shut up. When I want you to talk, you'll talk plenty. March." They found a way through the trees hiding the patio, and just as they emerged, Lou Maclin came running out from the house. "It's empty," he cried. "What?" "Cleaned out. One Chinese cook in there, so frightened he couldn't talk. I think he's a mute anyhow. But that's all." Every room empty, and I found hers. Plumb gone. Rip's mind leapt backward. Those shots, he exclaimed. She got away with Gruman, Maclin nodded. That's it, and they'll never make it. If Rip had let impulse and impatience capture him once or twice during the long night, they were gone now. Face to face with a danger that superseded all others, the threat to Joan's safety, he was rigid, cold as steel, and in his eyes was a ruthlessness that boded ill for man, beast, or devil that got in his way. He turned first to his captive. Start talking now, he said, and talk fast. If you don't, I won't shoot you. I'll simply dismount that hotchkiss of yours, and let the Chinese in there know they're free. Whether it was this prospect, or Rip's eyes that decided the captive, there was no argument. They escaped, he hastened to say. The new man, and the chief's girl. Tryin' to make the pass, I guess. Who's in the way? 3. There's the lookout, at the opening. 2 others. Their breeds and rifle shots. I thought I heard. How many've gone after them? Rip cut in. Miller and Landers, and 3 more. 2 of them are men. That's all there was here, except me. As Rip was silent, he went on. That's all, amigo. Don't leave me here for those Chinese, will you? He shivered. But Rip seemed not to have heard him. 5 of them, he muttered. And then the other 3, if they've joined. Probably the lookout will stay where he is. Let's go, Lou. With an even break, we can do it. Maybe we can count on Groomman for some help, if he's not already dead. They locked their single captive into a small house where munitions and dynamite were kept, and 10 minutes later, recovering their horses, were streaking over the road, which Joan and Gruman had taken hours before with Miller at their heels. The moon had been out of sight some time. It was drawing toward morning. No rifle shots marred the silence of the canyon. There was no human sound. Nothing, until, rounding a curve at a gallop, they came suddenly face to face with 2 men armed with rifles. One was scaling a high wall of rock. The breeds, Maclin shouted his warning. The rifles came up, but not as quickly as the swiftly drawn pistols of the 2 riders. Neither had a break in his stride. 4 shots had barked out before either of the 2 men in the road had fired. The first tumbled backward from the embankment, Maclin's man instantly dead. The second writhed, groaning in the road. There was no expression in Rip's face. He jerked his mount to its haunches and leapt to the ground. They didn't get past here, he flung over his shoulder, and bent down over the man on the ground. Marame, hombre. Look at me. The glazed eyes saw, and a shudder ran through the frame. But there was no pity in Rip's face. You're dyin', he advised, and maybe I'll let you die easy. But you won't, unless you tell me what happened to my friends. Which way did those 2 riders go? The breed stared, helpless, agonized with pain. Rip's fingers dug into his shoulder. He gasped, waved an arm weakly over the ridge. There, he croaked. Rip whirled to his feet. There's pony marks down here, Maclin yelled. This way, lots of them. Good, Rip swung into his saddle. Let's go. They rode. The sky was paling slightly as they reached the opening from the ravine, where Joan and Gruman had made their descent to the shelter of the watercourse below. Dawn was coming when, at the foot of the hill, having forded the stream, they halted at the sound of a rifle shot from above them. They're just ahead, Maclin said. Take it easy, Rip, there's 5. If nothing's happened by now, we can afford to use judgment. It'll be daylight right pronto, and there's no use stumbling into them in the dark. They commenced a cautious ascent of the steep slope. Chapter 24. Yanez was staring through the open window of the shack with feverish, bright eyes. Behind him, Joan lay on the makeshift cot in restless slumber. It was not really sleep, for every few minutes she awakened with a start as a rifle shot echoed through the valley. For 2 hours, Miller had given these periodic warnings that he was there. Dawn was coming now. Gruman had seen the two figures on the opposite hill, and he had seen them disappear. The distance was too great for recognition, but he told himself that it might be Maclin and Rip. Not that it would matter. He knew Miller's plans. The mine owner would wait until morning, sure of his ground. He could either starve them out or make a rush and finish it. In either event, there was no hope. Gruman's restless eyes kept returning to the girl. As she lay there, she was unbelievably lovely, unbelievably young and girlish in her half-sleep, her utter weariness. Dawn. The chill was in his bones. He looked at Joan. She had trusted him, yes. Yet for her, he had been willing to give up freedom, to sacrifice life. What matter that she had not asked it? What matter the thing that he knew, that she loved Rip? The day was coming. He could see the boulders and the crevices in the slope behind which Miller's men had taken cover, and he smiled a thin smile. What chance would Rip have, even if he did come? What chance to cover that open slope without a blade of grass for protection? "Ho there, Groomman," Miller's voice called. Joan awakened with a start, her limbs rigid. She sat up, wide-eyed, staring at him. Gruman moistened his lips. "Go ahead, Miller. What is it?" "Sunrise," came the reply with a laugh. "Going to finish you, Gruman, right now. You've got 10 minutes to decide. Turn over the girl, and we'll forget that you wanted her as much as I did." Gruman started. His cheeks went white. Slowly, he turned to Joan. They looked at each other, unspeaking for a moment. She was doubly lovely in her pallor, her utter helplessness. A helplessness the more feminine, because he remembered so well her arrogance and pride. Her red lips parted, and her wide eyes pleaded. Gruman's eyes sprang to flame. 10 minutes, he cried. 10 minutes, Joan. Good God, girl, we're at the end of the world. There's nothing from here on. But I tell you, it's worth it all if I can hold you in my arms. For a second, Joan's eyes leapt with admiration for the wild, untamed spirit of the man. Tell me, Joan. One white hand fluttered against his shoulder. Joan was shaking her head. Give me a pistol, if you care that much, she said, her voice hoarse. He saw the agony in her eyes, and his own fell. Perhaps for the first time, at the brink of death, Gruman realized what all this meant to her. Her eyes told him, her words confirmed their message. This was no game to her, this thing called life as it was to him. It was more than a moment, more than a gesture. It was an ideal. I'm a fool, he said hoarsely. Why the devil didn't I let Rip help? Ready, Gruman? Came Miller's hard voice. He did not move. She had interpreted his words. During the silent hours just past, he had told her something of what had happened since Rip's escape. But her eyes were beyond him, fixed far down the level slope, at moving objects discovered by the pink and yellow of early dawn. They widened. Gruman whirled. Look, he cursed. The crooked sombreros were not to be mistaken. Rip and Maclin lay half-concealed, far down the slope, still out of sight of the besiegers of the shack. But once they stood up, there were 300 yards of open space without cover of any sort. It's them. They got here. Suddenly, Gruman gave a harsh, croaking laugh. And for what? The Juve got as much chance of getting to us, with 4 or 6 men there. Why, you're dead as soon as they stand up. He had seen the flush of hope stain her pale cheeks at sight of Rip. Now Gruman saw Joan's red lips droop, saw the color flee. He mustn't come, she whispered. Gruman did not answer. Pale and silent, he stood watching her. The pride drained from his bearing. His eyes flickered over the covering of Miller and his men. He heard Miller's challenge, last chance, Gruman. Suddenly steel took Gruman's limp frame. His eyes lighted again, with the light of utter daring. "I'll fix it," he said. "One way or the other, you've given me the thrill that is life, Joan. Here's to happiness from Karl von Steglitz and adios." She stood horrified, stricken to stone. She saw him swing open the door, and heard him drop down the bar. Chapter 25. He crept up the hill as daylight came. With full light, they could see the hopelessness of their position. They were only partially in concealment. At any moment, they might be discovered and become the target for bullets. Rip and Lou Maclin had 5 rifles. They heard Miller's last challenge, and Rip tightened his belt. Grim-lipped, he turned to his companion. "We start when they do, Lou," he said softly. "Whatever happens, try to get Miller." Maclin nodded. There was no need for words. They were doomed men, self-doomed. But if Miller could be downed, at least one menace was removed from Joan's way. Then suddenly, they saw the door of the shack open. Maclin gasped with surprise. They saw Gruman outlined there, pistols in either hand. He wavered for an instant. He moved. Suddenly, he was staring toward where Miller lay. The first shot came. There was a curse. Then from Gruman's gun, there came 3 quick shots in rapid succession. Still, he charged on. Puffs of smoke came from behind the rocks. Maclin leapt to his feet. Those 3 shots, Rip. The warning. Through Rip's humming brain, there filtered only a vague recollection of the signal they had arranged. He saw that the attention of Joan's pursuers was centered entirely upon the madman swooping down upon them. Rip and Maclin started on a run. They were not observed. Groomman came on down the hill, his guns banging as he came, a slim, wild figure, laughing like a fiend as he came. One of Miller's men fell backward. Rip ran. He saw spurts of lead kicking up the dust all about Gruman. He saw Gruman stop in his wild stride, stagger, keep on. Again, Maclin fired. One of the men slumped forward. Rip was close enough now to see Gruman's face. It was distorted with bitterness and contempt. He kept on walking, weaving now toward Miller. Blood streamed down over his left arm. His pistol fell. The air sang with lead. Blood stained his shirt. Gruman fell forward to his knees, laughed, flung up his pistol again and fired. Then he dropped face downward. It was then that a shout of fear came from Landers. Then that Rip opened fire. Walking steadily on, he came, pistols at his hip. Miller whirled. The third man fired wildly, crying aloud in fear. Miller understood now. Rip was too close. Gruman's strategy had worked. Flinging away his rifle, Miller flashed out his 6-shooter savagely. Landers, on one knee, followed suit. For the space of 3 seconds, the air was blue and white with powder smoke, smoke with vicious red jets of flame stabbing through. Rip's gun was empty. There was an utter silence. Arlen Miller lay on his face. Landers was writhing out his life 3 feet away. The third man had been dead for several seconds. From Rip's thigh, staining even his thick chaps, a trickle of blood ran. Lou Maclin bore not a mark. Rip was white. His eyes were on the prone body of Karl von Steglitz, who had been Gruman. He gave the signal at that, didn't he? Rip said. He took a step forward and dropped to one knee as his left leg crumpled. Lou, get Joan. When Maclin made off, Rip lay there, his eyes on Gruman thoughtfully. The others he did not notice. He had not known them well enough even to hate them deeply. Miller was an enemy by name, a man who had played a losing game in an attempt to dominate the valley. He had picked the wrong victims. But Gruman, for him, Rip had known hate, admiration, distrust. Here was a man whose memory could not fade. His lips twisted. He sighed. I reckon you finished just about as you'd have had it, though, partner? In one grand blaze, There were many men sliding down the steep incline across the valley. They did not come up for some time, and by then they had been recognized. When they arrived, Sheriff Ramsey and Sam Long, stiff and white but game, were at their head. "All over?" Long grinned. "I went out after you that night, Miss Joan, and I found Stubby dead. So was Rissack. Then I went back cautious-like, and spent about 10 hours playin' hide-and-seek with one of these hombres who came back to finish me." Oh, he talked before he cashed his chips. They talked swiftly. Maclin was explaining the coup in detail. Rip did not hear. He was sitting upright beside a tiny spring, and Joan was at his side. Her hands were in his, and her eyes were tender and misty. "What are they talking about?" She smiled. "You, I think. They've just found out that you're a hero, or something." She gave a little involuntary shudder. "I thought you were going to be killed." That was why he went out as he did, to draw their fire. "Rip, these awful things won't ever happen again, tell me no." He pressed her hands a little tighter, and gave a tender little smile. "If I tell you no, Joan, will you tell me yes to that little question o' mine?" She flushed, and imperceptibly she was closer to him, so near that his lips could almost touch her hair. "I suppose," said Joan, "I suppose I'll have to do my share for the peace of the valley. You seem to be the troubleshooter. Shall we announce it now?" "No," Rip drawled. He was tired and worn, and pleasantly aware of an invalidism that she would have to attend. "Wait till I'm able to celebrate with them."